Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined today by my dear friend, Old Boy. How's it going, Old Boy?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. And it's great to be here chatting to you. It's been a while, and I'm excited to catch up.
This has been a long time coming. We've been talking on and off for it feels like a year now about these Pelasgians. When was the first time you did your big deep dive onto your channel? Because I know this has been a pet project for you for a while.
Yeah. It's got to be a while now. It's got to be the last year or so, I would say, that I've started doing research into them and honestly compiling the sources and just trying to put them in some kind of order was honestly the hardest part, because you just have these fragmented kind of pieces here and there that are just, you have some really in-depth accounts, but then you have also these little fragmented accounts, just little here and there's from different authors, and piecing it all together was really tough, to be honest. So that was the bulk of the work.
I can imagine, right? And and some people have tried to do this, but they're never doing it from the way that you're doing it, It's interesting. Let's
Oh,
talk for
thank
a
you.
minute before we dive deep into it, just who the Pelasgians kind of are. So when I was looking into this, like etymologically, what's interesting when you look at the word, it relates to the Greek word ancient, and it's the son of the first man, Phoronesus, Pelasgus, and his descendants are the Pelasgians, right? Would you say
Mhm.
that's correct? You
Yeah,
know?
so the Pelasgus is basically their eponymous ancestor that they're all named after, and he was a son of either Zeus and Niobe, or of Larissa, I believe,
Yeah.
and then
Or
there's
Laodicea
different.
and Phoronesus. There's a bunch of different ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a few different tales. So there's three versions of the story, really, from different regions of Greece, and they're all slightly different. The lineage of the people in the story is slightly different as well. But overall, on the whole, there seems to be definitely a connection between Pelasgus and Larissa, and that is the name that they seem to take for the citadels. And when you look at where they're all located, there's some in Asia Minor, Syria, the islands of the Aegean, the Peloponnesus, up in the northern regions of Greece, even Italy. There's even up on the coast of the Black Sea as well. I believe there's one called
Yeah, and when
Larissa.
I was looking, there's even speculation among the Celtic connections. It said like potentially going as far as into Spain. So
Right.
it's kind of but then you're getting into contested waters. But it's just
Mhm.
interesting to think about. So from the sources, when I was gathering, is that basically the Pelasgians are sort of some pre-Greek empire that had spanned most of the region and and set up all of these cities, right? Like
Mhm.
we have all these stories. When I was looking into the founding of all this, it tends to center around this character Phoronesus first. Did you get that story?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, he's essentially in the family line of Pelasgus, isn't he? He's one
He's
of
kind of
these
like
early
this ancient.
descendants.
Well, you get this whole thing where it's like Phoronesus is considered to be the first man after Hermes confuses the languages, and
Right.
then he establishes the rites of Demeter, and
Hmm.
he is the first one. He sets up the temple to Basileia, they say sometimes, in
Okay.
Hera,
Hmm.
and it's really interesting these words because like Larissa, right? When I was looking into the etymology of that word, we have deep into the earth. Some people were saying fortress and
Hmm.
kingdom. And then if you look at the name Basileia, you're dealing with queen and kingdom. And this also connects to all these other interrelated names like Despoina. Once we get to Italy, you get to Turan. We're gonna,
Hmm.
it gets so interesting with all these connections. But there seems to be this establishing of the city based around this kind of virgin figure. Like Phoronesus is set to set up the Prytaneum, the beginnings of democracy. And then this
Hmm.
flame kind of then goes, and anytime they would set up a new city, they would colonize, they would build a new temple to Hera and Hestia, have a hearth with the flame, and they would install the virgin goddess. And this was the thing wherever they went. And it's kind of wild, but this seems to be, like, from everyone's accounts, the roots of all of this: the Eleusinian mysteries, the Samothracian mysteries, the rites of Medea. All of this seems to go back to this ancient Pelasgian origin. We even have them coming out of ancient Crete. So I really wanted to dig into this because, like, this is such a massive thing. And then also, Ammon had turned me on to, or Ammon had first mentioned these guys a while ago. But even before I had met Ammon, I'm just trying to find the book here.
Mm-hmm.
Even before I had met Ammon, I had got really into this particular book of cosmogonic eros.
That looks ace.
Oh yeah, this is
not
amazing.
Seen it.
So this is a class. Well, he's a Germanic philosopher, and he's a Germanic pagan.
Mm-hmm.
Name is Ludwig Clavez.
Oh yes,
I've talked about him several times.
Yeah. I've read a little bit that of the book you sent me actually, but it was a different one.
Yes, I sent you, I think, Chthonic Gnosis. But yes, so Clavez is one of these pagan philosophers, and he was looking to go to the roots of culture, and he wanted to find. He was all obsessed with this idea of language and trying to get to a pure language that would get you to the elemental root of the ideas before we have all of this metaphor. And he was really interested in this, and he saw this in the ancient Greek, because in the Samothracian mysteries, the secret words are Pelasgian, right? In the Eleusinian mysteries, the secret words are Pelasgian. We have all of this hidden stuff dealing with this. So he kind of comes up with this whole concept of the Pelasgian man or the Pelasgian human, who are like these poets and artists who go back to this imagined way of thinking and try to get to the root of the element. And like, so when I heard him talking about, there's so much magic in this idea of the Pelasgian, and it's even still kind of relevant within the pagan tradition. And so I really wanted to explore this in its full depth, because like you were just saying, when I went to go look this up, it's so confusing. You're like, well, some people say the Pelasgians are some people say the Tyrrhenians are not the Pelasgians. Sometimes the Pelasgian and Tyrrhenians are the same. Sometimes the Etruscans are Pelasgians. Like, there's all of these different interconnected stories, right? So you're dealing with something so ancient. It's been hard to kind of piece together. So I was really excited to pick into this with you and to share some of my ideas and to go through your thesis here.
Excellent.
So let's bring it up. Oh, sorry. Wrong.
No, I think you've got some good key areas of interest there as well, and I think they'll overlap nicely with some of the sources I've got, because just for the viewers, as I mentioned to you earlier, I've just broken it down into the religious institutions that they were responsible for sort of founding, the locations where they were, talk about the Pelasgian letters as well, specifically. So I've just broken it down into a few sections just to try and give it a little bit of structure, and then we could just touch on the main topic.
The last thing I wanted to get at is what we're going to get into in my part of the presentation. Is I really wanted to connect this to the founding of Rome, the Pelasgian, because we have so many of these interesting stories related to the founding of Rome, and we're going to get into some of the more esoteric and magical elements there. So it's going to be great. Take it away.
Excellent. Okay, so on the first up, this is just what the lexicons say. So the LSJ tells us that it's a term used generally for Greeks, and it cites quotes from Hesiod, Dodonin, Pelasgon, Hedranon, or the Dodonian abode of the Pelasgians. So that's one of the examples that it gives there on the LSJ. And they also give a quote. Yep.
This is important because, like, Dundonian Zeus is widely considered where the Zeus cult originates. You know, you have all this mountain worship, even before the Olympian stuff. So that it still takes it back, even though it's still very, very Greek.
That's it. And this does seem to be one of the main areas where they are said to congregate, because one of the main themes you get as you're reading through these stories is they're never settled in one place for too long. Something happens, they get moved on a lot. So one of the main areas where there seemed to be was Arcadia. Then they moved up to a group of them moved up to Dodona, some to Thessaly, and then from there that group then went over to Italy. But then you've also got other groups doing other things as well.
Yeah, going to Asia Minor and stuff.
yeah. So they really are everywhere. And I mean, there's even one account where I believe it was Athens that got granted a patch of land near Athens that wasn't really very useful, and they were able to cultivate it and make it that attractive that they then eventually got turfed off of the land. Yeah, so they seem to be conflicting or getting out competed and moving on a lot. So you get a sense that the migratory, not
this occurs
necessarily
later on in the Italian tales that I was reading, because in some of the Italian, they talk about how they had set up shop and then they get attacked and get forced inward into Latium, which is a swamp, right? And then they have to struggle there, and eventually they become kind of intertwined with the Etruscan Aborigines, and you can't really tell them apart anymore. And that's what happens to the Pelasgian route in Italy,
It's that account you've just mentioned as well. It's really interesting because they definitely seem to have had good seafaring tactics, because when they reached the mouth of the Po River, it says that the people who were less able, that they left them there to defend the ships, and that they built, like a bit of a fortress around the ships so that they could retreat if they had to. So, they've done this before. They've got experience doing this from the tactics that they're using as well.
Just so wild that these guys are going around and they're setting up cities all over. They're taking their sacred fires and their virgin temples and they're planting their seeds all over the Mediterranean.
That's it. And further to what you've just said there, underneath we get a quote mentioned from Euripides. This is back on the LSJ. Tersenoi Pelasgoi, so Tersanian Pelasgians, used as a double barrel kind of word there. So
they mean both, right? So it's kind of interesting.
That's it. And we'll explore these sources later, because there seems to be a bit of a variation as well. Sometimes you have Terranians, sometimes Tersanians. So this sigma seems to drop out in some dialects as well. And then the Lewis and Short Latin lexicon, they have to say the oldest inhabitants of Greece, who were spread likewise over parts of Asia Minor and over Crete, Latium, and Etruria.
There we go.
And then we also have Roman numeral on there as well. Also told us that the term could be used for Greeks, and that the word Pelasgia is used as an old name for the Peloponnesus, and is a name of a district of Thessaly. So you can see how there's even cities called Pelasgia as well, and regions rather.
I remember reading about the connection to Lesbos, and a lot is made of this because of the 10th muse Sappho and the oracular. There's an oracular temple at Lesbos where they're supposed to have the head of Orpheus.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And Orpheus is a big deal.
Well, that's it, especially when you look at the similarities between what Robert Graves calls the Pelasgian creation myth and this information that seems to come from Pherecudes of Souros. It does seem to have had or the similar themes, shall we say, with the Orphic cosmogony and stuff. So you can definitely see there's some overlap, because some of the mentions of Orpheon are in the Argonautica and stuff. So
absolutely, there's a clear kind of like evolutionary spark,
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll continue.
So if we go to this slide here, so the top one, this is just what I used for my own presentation before. So this is just what you get off Wikipedia, this top one. So see how it says the Arcs of Argos, and 2 towns, Larissa in Thessaly and one in the Peneus, are believed to have derived their name meaning citadel from Larissa. And it says, so she's described by Pausanias as a daughter of Pelasgus, son of Triopas, king of Argos. And this Triopas is actually interesting, because some people that talk about you can obviously see the words made up of the word tree and opas or ops.
Right, the face, the gaze, the word, one of the most magical source of Medea's power. We'll leave it at that.
But later on, you will get an account which talks about an old form of idol of Zeus with 3 eyes.
Oh, wow.
And which may relate. I just have a feeling. I'm wondering, because the cult titles as well. Am I getting that right, Snappy?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
you're totally getting it right, right? And when you're getting on to this whole the three eye thing in the
yeah,
gaze, like this is the magic, witch magic. This is also the power to with the gaze, right? When you're dealing with the ops, this is the Saturnian magic, which we're going to see is very deeply related to the Pelasgians, because the Pelasgians set up all the Saturnian stuff in Rome. I believe it's Pausanias, but you'll know better. But yeah, the Saturnian magic is all about this idea of cutting, and the act of perception is an act of cutting. It's an act of isolating something in time. And they have all of this stuff about doing this, about invoking the magic of the gaze, locking into, it's all time related and
yeah.
seasonal cyclical magic,
It's making me think of Schrodinger's cat, and the act of observing something and collapsing all realities into the
Exactly.
observers. Wow, yeah, yeah,
Think about Chronos as the infinitely infinitesimal small point, right? The one that divides, and then Rhea is the ever expansive flow of the universe, right? And together they inform that throne, that Saturnian power, right? That commands time, right? And the ops, right? You're getting into also getting into the magic of the word, like in the ancient stuff. Like a lot of this gets confused with the logos, but the logos is about reason, taking into account. But the ops is the songs of the birds. It's that which is heard upon the vibration. And again, we're dealing with this idea of the vibration of the universe striking of Artemis's bow and allowing that to reverberate across time. And then you listen to that. We have a parallel in the Vedas. And when I was digging into this a while back, if you go to the Proto-Indo-Aryan root, it's the same root, op and vak. And vak in the Veda is the song of the birds, that which the rishis heard. And it is the gaze, and it is representative of this goddess Saraswati. So there's all this kind of parallel too. And we can see how deep this goes. It's connected to this whole Proto-Indo-Aryan as well, right?
yeah. Yeah, for sure. You can certainly see that permeating through the languages, especially, when you start looking at these roots and tracing them and, seeing what descends from them. They're clearly there, you know what I mean? It's a science. So,
absolutely.
But, just obviously, for everyone watching, the red underlined parts are the bits that are pertinent here. So the bottom image there, that is just an excerpt from the LSJ, and it's telling us what they say about Larissa, a citadel such as the Larissa of Argos. And
this is so important, the citadel, the fortress, right? Because again, this takes us back to the names of the sacred queens and these magic, like Basileia is the queen and the kingdom. And this is hugely important because, like, take for example, have you read Aristophanes' Birds?
I've read excerpts of it. I've seen bits and pieces, but I've never read it all the way.
It's a short one. Go through it because it is going to blow your mind just because of all this stuff, right? We know Basileia is also an epithet for Persephone, right? And this is going to come into play later with my stuff. But what we're dealing with is that Basileia in the story of so what happens in Birds is you have these two guys who get fed up with Athens and they decide that they're going to go seek out the magician, right? This magical hoopoe bird who's actually a transformed man who got cursed and turned into a bird. And they're going to figure out the magic, and they're going to build an empowered city in the air that's going to then steal all of people's prayers and take the power from the gods. So they start doing it and they start to achieve success. But then Zeus is going to come and attack. So what happens is Prometheus hides himself under like a shade and runs into the temple of the city of the birds. And he goes to the main guy, this guy, his name is the Trusty Friend, and tells him that if you want to beat Zeus, you have to get Basileia. You have to get the queen. The power of Zeus is Hera. What they use that word though, Basileia, very important, right? And so what he winds up doing is after he beats a bunch of his things, Zeus is desperate for ambrosia. They're not getting any prayers. So he says, fine, I'll give you some ambrosia if you give me Basileia. And Zeus, desperate, gives up Basileia. His trusty friend marries her and becomes the new Zeus. But this is a constant theme, right? We got to understand how important this theme of abducting the virgin is too, right? Herodotus begins his histories with this. We have all of these stories from Medea to Persephone to there's so many of these different women across the Greek tradition who are abducted and and their powers usurped. And this seems to be this relating all the way back to this primordial Pelasgian Larissa myth.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well how for me there's always this connection going back to like the water that was settling around the fertile plains, and when you look at the lineages of these people of where they supposedly descend, it seems to all go back to either Poseidon or Oceanus, and
Absolutely.
then you've got linguists like Beeks, who proposes that the name Oceanus is non-Indo-European as well. So because in this is just one linguist's theory regarding that, but it was interesting nonetheless, because then he even went on to say that the idea of a river surrounding the ocean was apparently non-Indo-European in origin as well, which isn't actually something I'd ever considered when I read that. But the only two really that I can think of, obviously you've got Oceanus in the Greek sphere, but you also have Jormungandr as well in the Norse tale, because he's basically the encircling river that goes around the Midgarth, which means middle yard or garden or middle enclosure, which is interesting because Mediterranean as well is kind of like middle,
absolutely
the Middle Earthian river, if that makes sense.
Oh no, we've talked about this, right? We know, like for our audience, remember that the Norse and the Greeks are in early contact, direct contact along the Danube, and are sharing in many similar ideas. Like Odin's got 12 disciples just coming from the east, just like Dionysus. Old Boy and I have talked about this in 2 previous episodes, but continue.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's just interesting how they were all related to these water nymphs and stuff. They seem to be massively important. And in my mind, I'm always trying to piece together the different groups of people who we've got from the genetic history as well. So obviously you've got your early European farmers that are in this region, but then you've got the Yamnaya nomadic pastoralists coming into contact with them. And one of the key things that's always been in the back of my mind is, where do the Pelasgians where do they sit? Because they do seem to preserve these older kind of words that some linguists say is non-Indo-European. So that, on one hand, you're going, right, okay. And then I believe it's Pelasgus as well in some of the sources. He's credited as being the first person to welcome Demeter as well, the goddess of the grain.
Yeah, he's given, when he establishes the first temple to Hera, then she teaches him how to cultivate the earth. And this is where the rites of Eleusis come from. And you'll even see the same names that are in the Eleusinian rites, like these really obscure ones, like Ebulius is said to be related to Phoronesis and Pelasgus. And this shows up in the Eleusinian rites, and it means good counsel. And it's connected to one of these epithets of Dionysus. So there's all of this. There's probably euhemerism going on here in some way, shape, or form,
Yeah, it's just there's so many levels to it, and
right.
But then on the flip side, you also have an account from I believe it's Aristotle, who says that the group who moved over to from Arcadia to Italy, called the Oinotrians, who settled on the southern west coast of Italy, Cantabria region, that they were actually pastoralists, and they were converted to a life of agriculture and communal meals. And so then in your mind you're going, okay, well, they are kind of moving around a lot. If they're pastoralists as well, then on the flip side you're kind of going, right, okay, so they seem to have some Yamnaya descent. So the conclusion it's still out, but the conclusion I'm kind of reaching is there seemed to be an early mixing of these two cultures.
That makes a lot of sense, because I keep thinking about when I was taking anthropology in university, one of the things that we're talking about when you're dealing with pro-Indo-European peoples, like our Proto-Indo-European Aryans, like the groups before. The big group that everyone talks about are the cow herders that come out of Africa. They go up across Asia and down into India, and then they come back around. And this seems to be the loop that they make. And you would assume that the Pelasgians are somewhat connected to this kind of lifestyle because you see some of that connection there, but they're clearly a seafaring people. So there's some kind of there's all this weird amalgamation going on.
Yeah.
You know, they're not like that. We know those people exist, but they're not them, you know?
That's it. And as you said earlier as well, some of the sources conflict. Some of them say, that they spoke a different language. There was something different about them. But some of the sources still say that they were Hellenes as well. Like, you know, they were part of a wider group, but they seem quite different as well. You know, older customs and things like that.
This is where it gets interesting because, you know, they call them Greeks, but then several times I came across different writers saying that they couldn't speak with Pelasgians. Like they like Greek their Greek was not intelligible with Pelasgian. You know?
Yeah, that's what I've seen as well. There were barbarians according to some of the sources in a way. So yes. So we've got up to Larissa here. You can see the LSJ saying it's a citadel, and when we look at some of the other sources as well, it might more specifically be to do with the Acropolis. So this is a list. So this, you actually sent me this when we were talking about this a while ago. You sent me this paper that this
this is about the lost because they were looking for, what is it, Hippothonus, or I can't remember his name.
Yeah, Hippothus, or Hippothos.
Thank you.
And so for those of you that don't know, he's one of the Pelasgians who's mentioned in the works of Homer as well, in the Iliad. And you know, he unfortunately he dies over one of the contests for one of the bodies of one of the other heroes. I can't quite remember exactly who it is right now, but it says he died far away from the fertile soils of Larissa. And this was trying to look through it to find out where it was. But for everyone at home, this is a list of all of the places that were named Larissa. And so it's named after one of the descendants of Pelasgus, or potentially in some of the sources his mother, according to one of them. So certainly a relation of Pelasgus, and it's what they seem to call their citadel. So as you can see, they're quite widely spread, these names.
Look how far it goes. You're going all the way past Syria, almost into Iran proper, and all the way up into Italy. Like,
yeah, they got around. And what strikes me as well is a lot of these places, when I've had a look, you know, the older levels of the buildings seem to be this, do they call it Cyclopean kind of masonry work? You know, these large irregular blocks. So a lot of these places have those.
There seems to be, I keep thinking, you know, because look, if you're looking at where all these are spread out, right? They're in Greece and Anatolia mainly. And this makes me think of, I wonder if they're connected to the previous, like, Tepe cultures, you know, that we know so little about. But what we see that comes out of those are those massive communal cities, like the first communal cities where you get hundreds of people living in these giant single homes, just like we see on the island of Crete, which we know the Pelasgians were one of the original Cretan tribes. So, you know, they're probably doing that kind of communal living in some form, building these massive fortress cities.
Yeah, that's right. And there's definitely something different about them. They seem innovative as well, because the sources say that they seem to be good with the land. So there's a lot of different factors going on that it's really hard to try and place them from the groups that we know exist today, or whatever scientists term, you know, Yamnaya and early European farmers. So yeah, we can move on to the next one. So these are the rites then, which they are credited with establishing. Excuse me. So the main ones are going to be the Oracle of Dodona here. We're going to look at the Lupercalia, Saturnalia, and the Peloria festival as well, which is apparently a Pelasgian festival. So let's take a look. So, and Achilles seems quite connected
I
to
did
this
see a
as
couple
well.
references. Isn't he like they say he's like descendant of Pelasgian blood or something?
Well, he worships this Zeus here, who he
I know
calls
that
King
for sure.
Zeus,
Yeah.
Lord of Dodona, god of the Pelasgi. And he
This is the
also,
earliest form of the Zeus cult, by the way, that we believe.
that's it, and he also inhabits a region. In some of the sources, well, look, it's I think it's a scholiast. He calls him Laryssian Achilles because of his
That's it. Yes.
proximity to where he lives.
Yeah, I saw that in the that dictionary there on Perseus Tacitus Wild.
And is it Pythias where he's from? That's
Yeah.
apparently named after a descendant from Pelasgus, because it's Lycaon, who is apparently, you know, the guy who gets his head transformed into a wolf.
Right.
He has 3 sons, and he himself is apparently a son of Pelasgus, and they're in Arcadia. And then they move north, and they found, I think it's like Achilles founds Achaia, Pythiotis founds Pythias, and and then it's the third one could be Pelasgiotis, I think the third.
Yeah,
one.
Pelasgiotis, which becomes modern day Larissa. I remember seeing that. Yeah.
So he's
that's
in
Greece.
That's it. He's in close proximity, and you've got to think as well. The centaurs were inhabiting Thessaly as well for a period of time. And when I've done research into the texts which talk about the centaurs, it says that there were actually Thessalians who mastered the art of riding the horse rather than being actual, you know, a dual entity. So to me, they definitely signify this nomadic horse culture, and obviously, who is Achilles tutored by? Chiron, isn't he? So
right. And I keep thinking, because anytime I was looking up the Pelasgians, they keep talking about, like you had mentioned, they're warriors, and they keep getting displaced because they keep going to war with everyone, or they keep trying to set up in other people's lands. But they keep mercenarying themselves out. Like, this was one of the things they were well known in Italy for, is like people, you know, they would travel around all these different areas and they would join in the fray. So there's all this kind of wildness there. And that makes sense, because we know, like, everyone is sending their kids to go study with the centaurs. You would send your young boys off to the barbarian tribes to harden them up, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's because, like, as you said, when they go into Italy, they seem to team up with other groups to oust other people, and I think it's based on who they associate they're the most related to as well, because some of the sources, it says they recognize there's like a kin between them, so they kind of team up and they get rid of these. I think they're called sickles, which is
that's it. They beat up the sickles.
Yeah. So it's them that they kind of get rid of. So
yeah, it's interesting, but they still get forced into the swamps of Latium.
Yeah, that's it. And their oracle told them to go there, I believe, as well. Yeah. So, because this is kind of related to that. So this is a fragment from Hesiod, which is quoted in Strabo, and he says, he came to Dodona and the oak tree, seat of the Pelasgi. And then later on, he goes on to quote a guy called Ephorus, who says, this oracle was founded by the Pelasgi, and the Pelasgi are called the earliest of all peoples who have held dominion in Greece. So that's quite a big statement, isn't it, really?
Absolutely, right.
And he's obviously paraphrasing an older source there.
Absolutely. This is, like Hesiod, right? You're talking about Homer and Hesiod is as important as you get in terms of like authority within the classical tradition.
Okay, so this is the account. Yeah, this is the account of Saturnalia by Macrobius. So as you were just briefly touching on there, when the Pelasgians go into Italy, so it's the story that you briefly touched on earlier. They moved across to the Spenetic River of the Po estuary. Then those that were able moved further inland, and they set up a big city there apparently for a time, until the local inhabitants that neighboured them, they started waging war on them. So they were forced to move over the mountains, the Apennines, and they came into like the region of Umbria and this kind of region because their prophecy told them to go and seek out this other land until they found a floating island. And they find this other group of people, they team up with them, and they oust the sick elves, and then they eventually ask for this piece of land, and it's got this floating island. And the oracle said, you know, these are the people you need to settle with, and then move forward. And it's an origin. They founded this festival kind of in that honor. So here is Macrobius. I am aware too of the accounts given by Varro of the origins of the Saturnalia. The Pelasgians, he says, when they were driven from their homes, made for various lands, but most of them flocked to Dodona, and doubtful where to settle, consulted the oracle. They received this in reply: go ye in search of the land of the sick elves and the aborigines, a land sacred to Saturn, even Cotule, where floateth an island. And another source says it was called something to like Sat. So Italy was had a name related to Saturn back then.
Of course,
it was called Saturn something. I can't remember the ending of it. Mingle with these people, and then send a tenth to Phoebus, and offer heads to Hades, and a man to the Father. Such was this response which they received, and after many wanderings they came to Latium, where in the lake of Cotilia they found a floating island, for there was a large expanse of turf, perhaps solidified mud, or perhaps an accumulation of marshland, with brushwood and trees forming a luxuriant wood. And it was drifting through the water by the movement of the waves in such a way as to win credence even for the tale of Delos, the island which, for all its lofty hills and wide plains, used to journey through the seas from place to place. The discovery of this marvel showed the Pelasgians that here was the home foretold to them, and after having driven out the Sicilian inhabitants, they took possession of the land, dedicating a tenth of the spoil to Apollo, in accordance with the response given by the oracle, and raising a little shrine to Dis, and an altar to Saturn, whose festival they named the Saturnalia. For many years they thought to propitiate Dis with human heads, and Saturn with the sacrifice of men, since the oracle had bidden them offer heads to Hades, and a man, Forta, to the Father. But later the story goes, Hercules, returning through Italy with the herds of Geryon, persuaded their descendants to replace these unholy sacrifices with others of good omen, by offering to Dis little masks cleverly fashioned to represent the human face instead of human heads, and by honouring the altars of Saturn with lighted candles instead of with the blood of a man. For the word Forta means lights as well as man.
There's so much wildness going on that I just want to people to think about. Number one, we're talking about a magical floating island in the Italian peninsula. What is this that's mysterious? What does this immediately make you think of? Makes me think of Aea and Circe, who's probably almost certainly of this Pelasgian kind of origin. And we're still, there's still a lot of debate about what Aea could be. So that's wild to me. And then the second thing, when we're talking about this substitution, the magical substitution, for my part of the presentation, I was rereading Plutarch's Numa, the biography of Numa. And there's this really infamous scene where Zeus shows up and demands heads of Numa. Numa doesn't know what to do, so he goes out into the wilderness and he cries out to his muse, the goddess Tacita Egeria. And she shows up and says, you don't need to give him heads, give him the fresh shoots of wild onions and garlic. And there's clearly like a magical drug recipe of some kind going on here that's obscured in the text, but it's just, there's this clear substitution in theatrical play always with these kind of Romanesque rites, Yeah,
it's almost like the idea of the scapegoat as well, a substitute kind of offering, isn't it? Or a substitute sacrifice, like that substitute king idea that Robert Graves.
Exactly. It makes me, Robert Graves talks about this, but immediately I think of the most famous one, the daughter of Agamemnon, Iphigenia, right?
Yeah.
She gets displaced by a deer and gets transported to the temple at Tori, right? Or you have even in some of the we don't have an existent version, but in one of the more popular versions of the Troy tale, Helen herself doesn't go to Troy. She is transported to Egypt, and she becomes a priestess of Isis. And only her image goes, her eidolon, they say, goes to Troy. So all these men are fighting over an idol.
It's crazy, isn't it? When
Right.
that account just completely just flips the whole thing on its head.
Flips the whole thing on its head, right? And it's like, are you guys stealing some kind of stone or something? What's going on here? There's so much. Again, like, where's the euhemerist part come into play with these myths, you know? But it's so interesting. And the Saturnalia stuff, right? We're talking deep Roman magic. And like, I like the part where later on, Macrobius will talk more about those dolls, but they used to make those wax dolls, and then they would go burn them at the end of the festival. They give them to their kids to play with. It's cool stuff.
Oh, I think it was called Saturnum. I think that's what the sources say Italy was called at that time.
Perfect. Amazing.
Yeah. So the Lupercalia. So this goes back to the Pelasgians of Arcadia, I believe. So you have the story of Evander as well, which kind of comes into this at some point as well. And I think we've got another source on him as well with regards to his mother, who was later venerated as a nymph. So this is from Ovid in Fasti. This is regarding Lupercalia and its connections to the Pelasgians. So the third morn after the Ides beholds the naked Luperci, and then too come the rites of two-horned Faunus. Declare Pierian muses the origin of the rites, and from what quarter they were fetched, and reached our Latin homes. The Arcadians of old are said to have worshipped Pan, the god of cattle, him who haunts the Arcadian ridges. Witness Mount Peloria, witness the Stumphalian waters, and the Ladon that seaward runs with rapid current. Witness the ridges of Nornacrine grove begirt with pine woods. Witness the Tricrini and the Parhassian snows. There Pan was the deity of herds, and there too of mares. He received gifts for keeping safe the sheep. Evander brought with him across the sea his woodland deities, where now the city stands. There was then naught but the city's site. Hence we worship the god, and the Flamen Dialis still performs in the olden way the rites brought hither by the Pelasgians. Sorry, did I skip a line? You ask, why then do the Luperci run? And why do they strip themselves and bare their bodies naked? For so is it their wont to run. The god himself loves to scamper, fleet of foot, about the high mountains, and he himself takes suddenly to flight. The god himself is nude, and bids his ministers go nude, besides clothing sorted not well with running. The Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Jove, and these folk are older than the moon. Even to this day, their unclad ministers recall the memory of the olden custom and attest what comforts the ancients knew. And then
it sounds like the Samothracian orgies.
Yes, the orgia.
Right? It's wild. It's wild. I love it. There's so much going on. And immediately I think about Lupa and the founding of Rome and Acca, Larentia, and all these other stories. Right, and the Floralia festival where you would have the prostitutes running around naked, showing off. You know, there's so much parallel. You know,
and just to that notion, further to that notion, even Virgil in the Aeneid, he says here, and to the Lupercal, the wolf's cave under a cold cliff, named in the Arcadian way for the wolf god, like Iron Pan. So, and that's just further to that passage there from Ovid as well, just in sort of that open to solidify what you've just said about the similarities there. So yeah,
wild. I absolutely love it, man. That's so cool. And you know, Pan, right? You're talking about primal nature, going back to the wildness and the rustic, barbaric kind of thing. So this makes a lot of sense from the ongoing image that we are seeing of the Pelasgians from the Greek lens. You know, they are this barbarian group, right? They are this rustic, rural people.
So here, this is the Peloria festival now, and this is just from the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Antiquities, and
I
it just
love that
says
book.
here, you know, it was yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
fantastic. You know, from the 1890s as well, but I feel like it's a good compilation.
Because it gives you the direct sources and it doesn't add too much. So you can just go check, right? And they have
Yeah,
all of these nice big characters. So anyone you're looking for. But yeah.
yeah,
And
it's
it's on
fantastic.
Perseus Tux.
That's it. But it says here, look, the Peloria was a festival celebrated by the Thessalians. So as I said, Thessaly seems like one of the main regions where they, you know, were settled for a time. And it says here it's compared to the Roman Saturnalia. Its origin was traced to the ancient Pelasgian times, and sacrifices were offered to Zeus Pelorius. And to the splendid banquets, any strangers were admitted. Prisoners were set free. Slaves enjoyed the great liberty and were even waited upon by their masters. So you can certainly see the similarities there. The flipping of the flipping everything on
Poles,
its head there, flipping of the poles, yeah, with that
the Saturn.
Saturnian kind of
We
switch.
see that Macrobius talks about that in the Saturnalian festival. This was a big deal where they would, in the household, the women and the children would rule during the week or so. It changed across time, but during the festival, the poles would be flipped, and they would crown a fool as the king, and he would get to set laws, and everyone would have to celebrate the laws. And this is ancient stuff, because we see similar rites even being practiced in ancient Sumeria and such. So it gets wild.
Yeah, these rites were definitely spread far and wide, because once you start peeling behind the a foreign veneer, you soon see that it's very similar underneath, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this, what it is? It's a way to alleviate the stress of an extreme hierarchical system. You allow people to go wild for a short amount of time and be in charge, and then it alleviates. It's a function of the city. And of course, it
Yeah,
would come out of this culture that's giving birth to this city culture. It's like the Pelasgians are the first kind of colonizing war imperial culture that I can think of, just about.
Yeah, they're certainly enigmatic, and they're hard to keep track of as well, because they just seem to have moved all over, as we saw
Right.
earlier. But this is Athenaeus here, Deep Norse Sophists, and this is talk about the Peloria festival. And what's interesting about this is there are other accounts of this mountain range breaking open and allowing a river to drain off, which then reveals the fertile plains of Larissa as well. So you've actually got a lot of this. It seems to go way back, because the stuff's still happening. The Earth's changing still. Like, I'm not saying it's going back way prehistoric, but lakes are draining off, revealing other lands.
But there's this really important thing too I want to highlight with people with the Larissa thing, because it does mean fortress, but it also means the deep fertile plain. And remember, right, this is also where you're talking about the founding of the rites of Demeter. And it's even said, like in one of the sources I'll show, that Phorenesis, the founder, the grandfather of Pelasgus, he has Isis in his cave temple. So
there you go. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's the neon sign, isn't it?
Isn't it? Right.
Yeah. So let's check out this one then. It's a lengthy one, so I'll try and steam through.
Love it.
Baton of Sinope the Orator, in his treatise on Thessaly and Hymonica, distinctly asserts that the Roman Saturnalia are originally a very Greek festival, saying that among the Thessalians it is called Peloria. And these are his words. When a common festival was being celebrated by all, the Pelasgi, a man whose name was Pelorus, brought news to Pelasgus that there had been some violent earthquakes in Hymonia, by which the mountains called Tempe had been rent asunder, and that the water of the lake had burst through the rent, and was all falling into the stream of the Peneus, and that all the country which had formerly been covered by the lake was now laid open, and that as the waters were now drained off, there were plains visible of wondrous size and beauty. Accordingly, Pelasgus, on hearing this statement, had a table loaded with every delicacy set before Pelorus, and every one else received him with great cordiality. and brought whatever they had that was best and placed it on the table before the man who had brought this news. And Pelasgus himself waited on him with great cheerfulness, and all the rest of the nobles obeyed him as his servants as often as any opportunity offered. On which account they say that after the Pelasgi occupied the district, they instituted a festival as a sort of imitation of the feast which took place on that occasion, and sacrificing to Zeus Pelor, they serve up tables admirably furnished, and hold a very cordial and friendly assembly, so as to receive every foreigner at the banquet, and to set free all the prisoners, and to make the servants sit down and feast with every sort of liberty and license, while their masters wait on them. And in short, even to this day the Thessalians celebrate this as their chief festival, and call it Peloria.
That's so beautiful, and this connects to so many classical Greek kind of things. Like, first of all, we know one of the main virtues is hospitality, right? You have to welcome the stranger, and this is welcoming the stranger in. And we have all of these various feast rites that are at the center of all these various magical different traditions throughout the Greco-Roman world. That's really powerful stuff. Super interesting.
That's it. As you said, it's that tie between your host and your friend, and it's still, you know, Xenos. It's a guest friend or host, stranger. It's all of those, you know, wound up into one. So it's reflected here in these old customs.
Well, and when I was looking in again to this Phoronesis character, it said that he sets up the city and then he builds the Prytaneum, which is this massive hearth, and he starts the eternal flame, which is the spark of Hestia, and people would go there to bake their bread. The city only had one fire, so everyone came and ate at a communal meal. And then they talk about they would bury the dead under the hearth, under the Prytaneum, and they would take the skulls and put them on the hearth of Hestia. And this would be the manes, the ancestors, would literally be part of your democracy. And where you did your democracy was where you baked your bread. Like, how wild is this? Where you all sat and ate, you know?
It's almost like how nature works as well, how those bodies break down into the ground and nutrify the earth, and then symbolically they're reborn again as crops, and you're eating them and you're paying homage to them again. Like, do you know what I mean? It's almost like they're able to hide that in the metaphor.
You're feeding your ancestors to the hearth. You're sacrificing them to Hestia and then to the rest of the gods, right? And then they are now informing you in the temple. They, you know, it's like this whole empowered reciprocal thing. It's so beautiful, you know?
Yeah, and very, as you said, communal and integrated as well. You know, how they still have a place for those who have come before them as well.
Right. And the women are at the heart of this, because they're the ones who are tending the flames. They're the virgins who give up their life in order to be these community providers. And part of that communal providing is they're baking the bread and they're also tending to the dead. This is one and the same. You're doing this at the same place. It's kind of interesting, you know?
And those females will be keeping the fire burning as well, won't they?
They will be. And it's essential look, every time they set up one of these Larissa fortress cities, the first thing they do is they build a massive hearth and they light that flame. They set up their Prytaneum, right? They install the virgin goddesses, right? You got your Vestal virgins, right? Everywhere.
That's it. They've got know the priorities there, don't they, when they're going in, what's important to the community and to, well, maintaining a life going forward.
Wow.
So this is with regards to the Samothracian mysteries. So we're just looking at the top one here. So this is from Herodotus, and this is with regards to the ithyphallic images of Hermes. And he talks about how it's connected to the Samothracian mysteries and the Pelasgians. So it was not so with the ithyphallic images of Hermes. The production of these came from the Pelasgians, from whom the Athenians were the first Greeks to take it, and then handed it on to the others. For the Athenians were then already counted as Greeks when the Pelasgians came to live in the land with them, and thereby began to be considered as Greeks. Whoever had been initiated into the rites of the Kiberi, which the Samothracians learned from the Pelasgians and now practice, understand what my meaning is. Samothrace was formerly inhabited by those Pelasgians who came to live among the Athenians, and it is from them that the Samothracians take their rites. The Athenians then were the first Greeks to make ithyphallic images of Hermes, and they did this because the Pelasgians taught them. The Pelasgians told a certain sacred tale about this, which is set forth in the Samothracian mysteries. And the term for rites in there in the Greek is ta orgia as well.
That's so wild. So we're dealing with this cultivation of the earth. We're back to this kind of Eleusinian type stuff, right? The ithyphallic image of Hermes, right? This is a chthonic Hermes, but is also one that is fertilizing the earth, right? There's this whole thing within a lot of these early rites where in order to make the crops grow, you have to make the earth, orgasm, right? And there's all of this sexual imagery and friction imagery, starting the fires, feeding the earth, doing these sacrifices, and it's related to Hermes, right? And we're also talking about the Kiberi. You have all of these various types of little spirits that appear all across the Greek pantheon. And what's so wild is many of the scholars will conflate them all, right? So the Kiberi, the Ideandactyli, I'm trying to think, the Lares, the Mane, all of the various spirits of the crossroads, right? These are different daimones, different spirits, and all of these rites are about feeding and tending to these spirits, basically engaging this kind of magic. And when we look back at a lot of this Indo-Aryan stuff, this daimonic magic is kind of the connective root that we really see across these traditions, this ancestral magic connecting to the spirits. And again, this also connects to that Larissa stuff, because the idea in dactyly, think about Rhea, right? How does she give birth to the dactyly? She sticks her hands deep into the earth, and then they're born from her fingers, right? These spirits that are cultivated in the earth. Mm-hmm. And Larissa is the deep earth, and they're cultivating these cities, and they're building these temples with these eternal flames for what? Tending to the ancestors. So it's like, to start the city, you gotta connect to the spirits of the place, and you gotta welcome them in. And you do that with this sacred hearth and this tending here.
And you've, as you said, with the Indo-Aryan side, that they've got the eternal flame as well in their temples. I mean, it doesn't look as we think of it as a hearth today, but it seems very similar.
Absolutely. So wild.
So yeah, we can hit the next one. And now, as I said, there was mention of the Pelasgians being pastoralist, and that top image there is a column fragment from the Samothracian temple complex. And then underneath is because the only other place I'd really seen that motif was that Scythian gold. It looks like two griffins tearing apart a horse.
Well, this makes perfect sense. Oh God, I was reading, it's been a while since I read it, but I was reading Karl Ruck's book on the Samothracian mysteries, where he's talking about the little people. And there's all this stuff about the Samothracian mysteries are said to come from the far north of Hyperborea and brought by these Amazonians.
I've seen talk about, because apparently doesn't Apollo come from there as well?
Apollo comes from there, but even before Apollo, this goes to Delos, but you get, Herodotus mentions this, you have Opi and Argi, and they're these twins who actually, they come to Delos to honor Eleutheria, the great nursemaid. But all this gets kind of displaced, but you can still go to Delos and you can see the tomb of Opus and Argi. And even later, at the later Delos mysteries, they forgot who Opus and Argi were, and they were still giving offerings to them. And there was archaeology done where they even found there was a whole cave to them that got buried and filled in, and they got displaced by Castor and Pollux.
Right. I was just about to ask, is there a similarity with Castor and Pollux? Is that the Proto-Indo-European kind of supplantation?
Supplantation. Well, what happens at Delos, it's kind of like they invite these priestesses in, and they come and set up shop, and then they spread the religion. And it all has to do with that Eleutheria nurse magic. And then they're the temple guardians. Opus and Argi are kind of like this Medusae, you know, and then Artemis and Apollo are given birth by Eleutheria with the help of Eleutheria. But this all later gets erased, you know. Artemis becomes the one who helps them both give birth. And there's no more mention of Opus and Argi. And then you get Castor and Pollux, and they're abducting their wives, you know?
Yeah.
And,
which fits the kind of Proto-Indo-European,
right?
Well, what seems to be the reality as well, looking at the genetic expansion and such. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely fascinating. I didn't even realize there was an earlier kind of version of
that paper. I didn't include it in this presentation, unfortunately, but I'll send you the paper and you can take it.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Because
the Phoronesis stuff is really interesting.
Yeah, I have seen the text relating to him. I didn't look into him specifically, but his name was coming up as one of these main ancestor descendants of the Pelasgians for sure. Yeah.
I got into it because for a while I was really interested in this hearth and the setting up of the Prytaneum and the fire stuff, because in some of the stories, you know, Prometheus is the one who brings fire, but in some of them it's Phoronesis who brings the fire. But either way, he's the one who sets up the first fire temple, you know?
Yeah.
So
I do think I've got a source about that in a wee while.
Interesting.
Yeah, I hope I've included it now. So here's the quote from Aristotle about them being pastoralists. So these Oinotrians, these were a group of Arcadians, believe they were descendants of Lycaon, who sailed over to Italy. So they were on the southwest coast of Italy. And this is what it says about them. So according to the historians, one of the settlers there, a certain Italus, became king of Oinotria. And from him they took the name of Italians instead of that of Oinotrians. And it was this Italus then who, according to traditions, converted the Oinotrians from a pastoral life to one of agriculture and gave them various ordinances, being the first to institute their system of common meals, hence the common meals and some of the laws still observed today by certain of his successors even today.
Wow. And even Aristotle, you know, what does he talk about? The communal meals, right? And we see this going right back to those Phoronesis myths again, right? The hearth and the coming around the sacred fire to break bread. Wow.
So I think there might just be one more about these local festivals, and it was just a general one. So if memory serves. Oh no, I must have just left it then. So we're now going on to sources which talk about the Pelasgian letters. So they seem to have ended up in Italy, according to some sources, and also the Greeks, the letters that the Greeks got are according to Diodorus, Pelasgian in origin. So this top one is from Solinus, Polyhistor, and it says, who does not know that the Dauni were named by Cleolaus, son of Minos, and that the Iapygians were named for Lapix, son of Daedalus, the Tyrrhenians for Tyrrhenus, king of Lydia, Cora by Dardanus, Agula by the Pelasgians, who first brought letters into Latium, Falisca by the Argive Halesus, Faleri by the Argive Falerius, and Fascenium also by the Argives. So it's just a little throwaway comment there in the middle there. The Pelasgians who first brought letters into Latium.
Wild.
And then the main one is this one here from Diodorus Siculus. Among the Greeks, Linus was the first to discover the different rhythms and song, and when Cadmus brought from Phoenicia the letters, as they are called, Linus was again the first to transfer them into the Greek language, to give a name to each character and to fix its shape. Now, the letters as a group are called Phoenician because they were brought to the Greeks from the Phoenicians, but as single letters, the Pelasgians were the first to make use of them and use of the transferred characters, and so they are called Pelasgic. Linus
so
also...
The Phoenicians were using the Pelasgian language. Wow.
Or certainly the alphabet, yeah. So I mean, it is possible to render another language in the alphabet, but it's saying that they were only called Phoenician just because they were the ones that were known to use them and
They were
probably
the traders, right?
spread them widely. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's so interesting. Okay, yeah. So that they became, the most. This is so interesting because we've always been told the Phoenician letter system is kind of the common. It became our modern alphabet, but now it's like no, it's based off of an earlier Pelasgian root.
That's it. And there was the translation that I got this from. I can't remember, but it was quite an authoritative publication. And there was a note, an editor's note, and it said, in corroboration of this, when the Palace of Cadmus was excavated, the carvings that were on the walls there weren't Semitic in origin, it said, but he was quite old when the translation was done. So, maybe the consensus has changed since then, but I just thought it was worth mentioning, but that's perhaps not relevant anymore. But anyway.
Interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it is. And I'm going to continue reading because there's a few more interesting points here as well, which I think you'll find interesting. Linus also, who was admired because of his poetry and singing, had many pupils, and 3 of great renown: Heracles, Thamouras, and Orpheus. Now Linus, they say, composed an account of the Pelasgic letters. An account in the Pelasgic letters of the deeds of the first Dionysus and of the other mythical legends, and left them among his memoirs. And in the same manner, use was made of the Pelasgic letters by Orpheus and Pronopides, who was the teacher of Homer and a gifted writer of songs, and also by Thumoetes, the son of Thumoetes, the son of Laomedon, who lived at the same time as Orpheus, wandered over many regions of the inhabited world, and penetrated to the western part of Libya as far as the ocean. He also visited Nysa, where the ancient natives of the city relate that Dionysus was reared there. And after he had learnt from the Niceans of the deeds of this god one and all, he composed the Phrygian poem, as it is called, wherein he made use of archaic manner both of speech and of letters.
That's so wild. Oh man,
Yeah.
Diodorus is one of the best sources, period. This is where you get the most complete version of the story of Medea, if anyone is interested. Awesome.
He's got the juicy sources, doesn't he?
Well, he's got the most wild kind of stuff, right? He's the one who tells you about her becoming the queen of the Medes. He's the one who talks about, I don't know where he gets his stuff from. You gotta wonder, right? And he talks about everything. I've only read, certain sections of the 10 books in his library, but every time I read it, I'm always just like,
yeah, I'm the same. I've turned a page and I'm lost in it for about 2 hours.
right. So let's see here.
So this was just a little bit more regarding. So we'll maybe skip over this one if we're because we're maybe about halfway through. I don't want to clog it up too much, but this was just going on about how. This is also from Diodorus. He says, I'll just paraphrase what he's saying here, that there was a flood and the Greeks did have inscriptions before, but it was all lost in the flood. And at this time, this is when the Egyptians kind of then started making advancements, and people believed they were the first people to make advancements in language and astronomy and such. So that's just kind of generally what it's saying.
Awesome.
So Pelasgus, because there's some interesting sections here. So again, this is from the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Biography. So again, we're just looking at the underlined sections here. So it says Pelasgus, the mythical ancestor of the Pelasgians, the earliest inhabitants of Greece, who established the worship of the Dodonian Zeus, Hephaestus, and the Kabiri. And as you can see, there's 3 different versions of the myth, one in Arcadia, one in Argos, and one in Thessaly. So if we jump down to Argos here, it says, in Argos, Pelasgus was believed to have been a son of Triopas. So I think this might have a connection to the 3-eyed Zeus again. And Zeus, and a brother of Piasus, Agenor, and Xanthus, or a son of Pheronius.
Yeah.
And to have founded the city of Argos in the Peloponnesus, to have taught the people agriculture, and to have received Demeter on her wanderings at Argos, where his tomb was shown in later times.
Wow. So there you go, right? Connecting us to Phorenesis, the building of the first city and the establishment of the earliest rites, right? And we have him connected to Demeter, to the Eleusinian rites. Wow. That's wild. Love it.
Yeah, it is. And sorry, just back in Arcadia, that mentions how he is his son is Lycaon. And he just tells you a bit more about that. And then in Thessaly, I just underlined this bit as this was interesting. This is a variation. So it says that he was a son of Poseidon and Larissa. So the Thessalian myth, rather than being a father, he's a son of Poseidon and Larissa. And Poseidon seems to have supplanted Oceanus in this instance because their lineage always goes back to Oceanus. And interesting how Poseidon could be a supplant, just like what you mentioned, as it seems to be a Proto-Indo-European over a potentially non-Indo-European Oceanus.
Well, it's so interesting because also, like, when I was looking into Phorenesis, sometimes he's like, he is the child of Poseidon in the nymph Larissa. Sometimes he's with the nymph Larissa or the nymph Laudike. You know, and these names, right? The bringer of justice, like Laudike, what's some interesting choices and words here, right? You know, but yeah, they're all so interconnected. This line, right, going from Pelasgius is pure magical, no matter which way you go, forward or back. But that's so interesting.
That's it. And then I think if we go on to the next slide, we'll get the actual sources. And just before we go into the sources, there was this section here which said about Pelasgis here. So this is a term, and it says Pelasgis, i.e. the Pelasgian woman or goddess, occurs as a surname of the Thessalian Hera in Apollonius with the Scholiast, and of Demeter, who under this name had a temple at Argos and was believed to have derived the surname from Pelasgus, the son of Triopas, who had founded her sanctuary.
That's so wild because, like, we know, like, Hera is the main goddess. It's the Samothracian mysteries, you know, and she's very different from the later Hera that is the wife of Zeus. She's like this empowered empress, you know. Oh wow, that's so interesting. And then of course Demeter taking us back to Pelasgus and to Phorenesis. Wow.
Yeah, that's it. So Pausanias gives us that. He says that, you know, Demeter, it says here, came to Argos and she was received by Pelasgus into his home. So obviously a metaphor there for perhaps adopting agriculture into your society.
That's so interesting. So interesting. Wow, love it.
And then there's another expansion here by Pausanias. He says, facing the tomb of the woman, and he's talking about the woman of the sea here, is the sanctuary of Demeter, surnamed Pelasgian, from Pelasgus, son of Triopas, founder, and not far from the sanctuary is the grave of Pelasgus himself. So he was buried close to the sanctuary of Demeter as well here. So
this also just blew my mind because this connects this more at the bottom here. You got the temple of Hera and Thea, the flowery, right? Yeah. The floralia and the nymph Chloris, which connects us directly to Acca Larentia, right? The mother of Lares, the mother of Manes, getting us into this Hecate Hestia imagery that is at the foundation of all of these cities. And Hera, like this triform goddess, you know?
And I think the Etruscan counterpart's Mania, I believe.
Yeah.
Who's the mother of the Manes and Lares in the Etruscan side of things as well.
Right? You got you got her, and then you also have Turan, which is like Aphrodite. You even have the same kind of magic mirrors that people were using for scrying.
Yeah. They're one of the they find a lot of those mirrors, don't they?
They do. They find a ton of them. But this is such an important philosophical image. It's one of the central images of the entire cult because it's like Aphrodite has to have the mirror in order to know herself, in order to recognize her own beauty, right? So it's this, you have to have the unfolding of creation in order for there to be beauty. Even the goddess has to see herself reflected in creation, right? It's like this essential theme of generation in that whole polytheistic tradition. You know?
Wow, you're definitely helping me understand the read between the lines, shall we say?
Oh, well, because, it's connected. When I look at the Indian traditions, I see a lot of this, okay? Because, like, all of a sudden, you got Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who has the magic mirror that she looks into, right? In the Indian side, we have Parvati, the consort of Shiva, goddess of love, who has her magic mirror that she looks into in order to know herself, in order to recognize her beauty. But it goes even deeper. Eventually, it's not enough to cognize the self, right, in the reflection. But eventually, the great goddess also cognizes the mirror and recognizes the beauty inherent in the mirror. And the mirror becomes transcendent and equal to her. So it's this idea of one and the many, or what, like in philosophy, in Indian philosophy, they called qualified non-dualism, or like qualified polytheism. So it's a one and a many type thing. Everything is united in this image of Aphrodite, but also, in order for her to experience herself, she has to separate, and that is beautiful and for the purpose of beauty. So wild,
That's really interesting, because I was just reading. It was like a talisman today. No, it was like a spell essentially of how to make a mirror, and it was for viewing like all of the universe. I think it was one of the Arabic texts that mentions Apollonius of Tyana. And they were talking about making this mirror, and to do that, you had to get 7 different gemstones and like melt them down to make the mirror, and then it's like polish them up, and and then you've got to inscribe the 4 corners of the universe and everything on there as well, and you had to inscribe the names, the sacred names, on like a Friday at 8 p.m. when the moon's in Scorpio or something. It was, it was the mirrors.
The 7 stones. This is deep muse magic. You got to go collect the stones from the fountain at Parnassus, and then you reflect the light from the stones. This gives you the rainbow, the prism. This is also dealing with the alchemical wedding. This idea of you unite the heaven and the earth. You draw down the star. You draw down the muse into yourself. You become that divine androgyne, the united force in one being. Right. So. There's so much magic there when you start to break down the symbolism and the reasoning for all of this, because that power of the 7 is this manifestation of the divine androgyne, the combination of the 3, the feminine harmony, and the 4 masculine reality. It's like, wild stuff. And it connects us deeply to the Indian tradition, where Shiva and Parvati cognize each other through the mirror, and they fall in love in this image of the Darpana, her mirror. And then together, they come into this act of lovemaking. And get this, right? It's the same root. I can't remember the word, but like in Greek, they use the word ecstasy, right? When you transform the act of lovemaking, not for the purpose of procreation, but for the purpose of transcendent bliss, so that you can expand beyond the self, right? So you want to exit, ecstasis, right? So you gain this. Exactly. You go through this process of ecstasy, of lovemaking, and then you become that divine androgyne, which is the penultimate moment before the realization of divine unity, which in the Indian is this idea of Brahman. But you can see all of these parallels between this mystical tradition,
So is Brahman kind of like the, what do they call it? The divine intelligible, would you say then, that first kind of principle that is after the infinite?
So the Brahman is kind of it's a deep philosophical concept for everything united in the totality of the unity. You could see this in the Orphic egg, right?
Yes.
Before the shattering and before Phanes, whereas Phanes would be that, or thesis, right, would be the penultimate moment before realization. And you also have the same kind of egg in the Orphic tradition. They call it the Hiranyagarbha, in the Vedic tradition, the Hiranyagarbha. So in Prajapati, and again, Prajapati is a manifestation of Brahman, but these are just philosophical, like Brahman is a philosophical word that comes out later through the, it's not from the oldest versions of the Vedic myths. It comes out in what we call the Upanishads, which are like philosophical commentaries on them, but it means that infinite unity beyond conception.
That's really interesting, because later I've got a source. It's from relating to Ferracudes, because he's got this Pelasgian, what Robert Graves calls the Pelasgian creation myth. And when you look at the sources, That actually seems to be a different version of where it's ocean and earth were one and the same, and then they're split.
Wow.
But what's interesting is Oceanus, which is Okeanos in the Greek, it's Orgianos. So it's Orge and Ge. So it's
Wow.
it's the word for earth is in Orgianos. And
Yeah.
you're there going, wow, it's even in the word that
It's literally inside the word, like in the middle of the word. It's whoa. That's
yeah.
beautiful.
So I'll show you that later. Excuse me.
Oh man.
So here was just another one from Hyginus Fabuli. Those who first built temples to the gods, Pelasgus, son of Triopas, first made a temple to Olympian Jove in Arcadia. And we're just going to have a few more of these little excerpts coming up just with regards to Pelasgus. So this is a quote mentioning the birth of Pelasgus here. But Niobe had by Zeus, and she was the first mortal woman with whom Zeus cohabited, a son Argus, and also, so says Achilles, a son Pelasgus, after whom the inhabitants of the Peloponnese were called Pelasgians. However, Hesiod says that Pelasgus was a son of the soil. But then when you go to, it doesn't really say son of the soil, it says autochthonous. So, you know, because they're using the metaphor of being born from the earth, but it just means that, you know, they're native, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Now we get
So
to
Larissa.
Larissa.
So we've obviously seen it can also be the citadel of the Pelasgians, but here, look at this. See how it says the Acropolis here. So this is Pausanias' descriptions of Greece, and I've underlined the key parts, but actually all of it's pretty worth reading, to be fair. So the Acropolis they call Larissa, after the daughter of Pelasgus. So it's specifically the Acropolis here. So this is tying up perfectly with what you were speaking about before, Snappy.
Oh yeah, we're the dead.
Yeah. After her were also named two of the cities in Thessaly, and one by the sea, and one on the Peneus. As you go up to the Acropolis, you come to the sanctuary of Hera, Acraia, or of the height, and also a temple of Apollo, which is said to have first been built by Pythias when he came from Delphi. The present image is a bronze-standing figure called Apollo Deira Diotes, because this place too is called Deirai or Ridge. Now this is quite interesting here. Oracular responses are still given here, and the oracle acts in the following way. There is a woman who prophesies being debarred from intercourse with a man. Every month a lamb is sacrificed at night, and the woman, after tasting the blood, becomes inspired by the god.
Whoa, drinking the blood of the lamb? Doesn't that sound a little Christian to you?
Yeah. And I'm wondering as well, could there be any metaphor to that, like behind that meaning too? But we do know from the other accounts that apparently they did offer sacrifices rather than vegetables, which were later, according to the other texts that we look at, supplanted. But moving on as well, we have on the top of Larissa is a temple of Zeus, surnamed Larician, which has no roof. And this is about the three eyes. The wooden image I found no longer standing upon its pedestal. There is also a temple of Athena worth seeing. Here I placed offerings, including a zawonon, or wooden image of Zeus. Sorry, it isn't here I placed offerings, it's here are placed offerings, including a wooden image of Zeus, which has two eyes in the natural place and a third on its forehead. This Zeus, they say, was Patrus, ancestral of Priam, the son of Laomedon, set up in the undercover part of his court. And when Ilion was taken by the Greeks, Priam took sanctuary at the altar of this god. And when the spoils were divided, Sthenelus, the son of Capaneus, received the image, and for this reason it has been dedicated there. The reason for its three eyes one might infer to be this, that Zeus is king in heaven is a saying common to all men. As for him who is said to rule under the earth, there is a verse of Homer which calls him too Zeus, or Zeus Catakathonius, or of the underworld, and the August, Persephone. The god in the sea also is called Zeus by Aeschylus, the son of Euphorion. So whoever made the image made it with 3 eyes, as signifying that the same god rules in all 3 allotments of the universe, as they are called.
That's so interesting, because we usually see that trimorphic imagery with Hecate, Artemis, Selene. You know, it's very much a feminine form of the deities. Oh wow! See, that was Zeus is quite striking.
The only other place I've seen like a triple masculine deities in the Celtic sphere with Lu. Sometimes he's depicted with three faces, sort of like three sections, And then finally it says, to resume after my researches into Achaean history, the boundary between Achaia and Elis is the river Larissus, and by the river is a temple of Larissan Athena. About 30 stades distant from the Larissus is Dume, an Achaean city. So look, you have all these Larissan Athena, for example, you know, specifically a Larissan version.
So interesting.
Pelasgian.
Wow.
So this is from Dionysius of Halicarnassus. And this just talks about, again, just a bit of the descendant here of Larissa and her offspring. So he just says the leader of the colony that he's talking about were Achilles, Pythias, and Pelasgus, the sons of Larissa and Poseidon. So these are the groups, the sons of Larissa, who moved further north out of Arcadia up into founding these areas near Larissa. And it says, when they arrived in Haemonia, they drove out the barbarian inhabitants and divided the countries into 3 parts, calling after the names of their leaders, Phthiotis, Achaia, and Pelasgiotis. After they had remained there 5 generations, during which they attained to the greatest prosperity, while enjoying the produce of the most fertile plains in Thessaly. So they're up in Thessaly for a large portion of time as well.
Wild.
And I'm just going to see if this one's this just talks about another Larissa. So these people also possessed themselves of no inconsiderable part of the Campanian plains, as they are called, which afford not only very fertile pasturage, but also pleasing prospects as well, having driven out the Aunisi, a barbarous nation. Out of part of them, they built various other cities, and also Larissa, a camp they named after their mother city in the Peloponnesus. So there you go.
This is a constant theme, building these sister cities to the mother city, right?
That's it. And we have mention again of her from Strabo. Now, the city of the Argives is for the most part situated in the plain, but it has for a citadel the place called Larissa, a hill that is fairly well fortified and contains a sanctuary of Zeus. And near the city flows the Inachus, a torrential river that has its sources in the Lycaeus. I can't pronounce that one. It's sometimes I find the English just so much harder to read than the Greek, just because it's not like phonetic. At least you're pretty safe with the Greek once you know how to pronounce it. And here is another mention here of the Larissians. A peculiar thing happened in the case of the Larissians. I mean the Castrian and the Fraconian Larissians, and third, those in Thessaly. They all had land that was deposited by rivers, by the Caster and by the Hermus and by the Peneus. And I just wanted to point out that they're all in these fertile plains. I mean, it would obviously make sense that they're going to be the regions that are in competition, that people are competing to kind of inhabit. But it does seem for the most part during this period, you know, there's rivers named after Larissa. They've got these settlements near these fertile plains. So potentially going back to that connection you were making earlier as well about the wealth being under the ground there, and that sort of chthonic element.
Wealth of the earth.
Wealth of the earth.
This whole thing with the Pelasgians developing agriculture, you know, or at least being at the start. They seem to be pastoralists who then also develop agriculture and seafaring. It's wild. They span these 3 different forms, you know.
Is that the kind of impression you're getting? Because that's kind of where I was going with it as well. It does seem to be like they're an early group who've adopted or taken another practice and merged it with their own.
Merged it, it's really interesting.
And it might just be worth mentioning just on that thought that, because I've done a little bit of reading on like the Hittites and stuff, and it's quite well written about with various authors and scholars that when they came to the land of the Hatti and kind of took over, that they did actually adopt certain phrases in their language, certain deities and gods and things like that as well. So, because most people just think you take over, you basically just fully supplant everything, but it doesn't seem to be the case. I wonder if it's because they're thinking about the descendants of these people moving forward and how are they going to kind of maintain a social power over them, I suppose, to some degree.
There's almost always, in religion studies, I studied this a lot. Like, how do you convert a populace? How do you convince people? And like a perfect example is look at Christianity. Okay, we'll look at Christianity in the Caribbean for a second. Okay, you take an example like Haiti. Catholicism, right? Rather than try to stamp out the indigenous African, like the indigenous local religion or the African religions, they incorporated it. And now you've created this whole Haitian Voodoo that is Catholic, indigenous, and African, and all uniquely Haitian, right? But you still get these saints, you still get this magic. And if you talk to a lot of these Haitians, they'll say, my voodoo is Catholic. Like there's no distinction. There's just been incorporation and supplantation, right? Mm-hmm. It's now you've taken these deities, these spirits, and you see them through an explicit Catholic lens, right? The other way is go to a place like Jamaica, right? Where they have like a Protestant thing where they try to destroy everything. They take away the drums, they take away everything, but it still doesn't work. The people instead find themselves in the text that they are given. They create their own forms through their own connection. The drum and dance becomes their main religion, and they see themselves in the Bible. So you can't really get rid of people's full culture, even when you try to stricken it. So almost always you get some form of the Catholic version where it's like this incorporation. And you see this with a lot of like the books, right? Like so much of the Bible seems to be explicitly trying to incorporate other deities' stories into them. Like look at the character of Samson. He's clearly Heracles. Like it's clear to anyone who's looking. And so they're trying to, like, you don't need to get rid of Heracles. You can now look at Samson, worship God, and you still can talk. You can still have the good story. We've now stolen it and stripped it of its worth and made it into something like this. Or they do the other thing. They do the satire, right? Where they vilify and denigrate and they turn it into a monster like they did to Saturn. Saturn becomes this wounded, debased monster, black cube, rather than that empowered goddess that we're looking for here, this Larissa figure, Yeah,
it's just clever branding, isn't it, really? That's
right.
That's what it seems to boil down to.
It all gets wild, right? It's all of these different stories. All these stories are like, you got to remember, all these cultures are talking, right? And of course, it's never a one-to-one either. There are many myths at play, many different cultures at play, and everyone is trying to usurp. Everyone's trying to tell their story that will then become the dominant myth that can empower their nation and empower them to take land. Like, you got to see it as the propaganda warfare that it is, Otherwise, you're missing so much of these texts. All right,
no, well put. Yep, let's move on. So this was just going on about the centaurs. I've touched on it earlier. I've just kind of paraphrased it, how these centaurs were also living in Thessaly for a time before the Pelasgians kind of moved over there. But as I said, when I've gone into the sources, they seem to be Thessalians who first mastered the art of riding horses. So I think the main story is about Ixion. He's like the king of the region, and there's these bulls running wild, going crazy, destroying crops, farmland, hurting people. And he puts some money up, and he says, look, whoever can get rid of these bulls, they're going to get a big payout. And these young band of young men, they were living up in the mountains, a mountain called Nephele, which means cloud. And apparently they mastered the art of riding the horses, because apparently before then they were only used for chariots. And it obviously meant that they could chase after the bulls throw spears at them, and then when the bulls turn around and chase them, they could just, you know, outrun them. And one of the sources even says about the etymology of the word as well, coming from, because it says, and that's why they're called centaurs, because they pierced the bulls through and through. And then linguists come along and go, well, you have the verb kenteo, which means to stab, sting, or prick, and then tauros, so it must come from kenteo and tauros, which is, I suppose, a amalgamation of kenteo, I am stabbing, and then tauros, bull, but then put into obviously a masculine name.
And again, this takes us back to that pastoral culture, because you got to remember, right? Wrangling the bulls is the entirety of those kind of cultures, you know? And now being able to do that on horseback, this is an even empowered form of this.
That's it. And it's very interesting to me how you've got this kind of metaphorical memory of these groups coming in, and they do seem to be influential because, as I mentioned Achilles earlier, he obviously venerates Pelasgian Zeus, but then he's also linked to Chiron, which his father has actually seems to have links to, because he's living in a Pelasgian region as well. So he seems to have links. And then he gets fostered with Chiron, doesn't he, or by Chiron, who teaches him the arts, so to speak.
So wild, so wild. Love it. Interesting.
So that was, I just threw that back in again because it was Larissa, but we saw that before. As you can see, the pretty widespread. As Snappy mentioned earlier, there seems to be a concentration around the coasts of Greece and Asia Minor, but then, you know, expanding outwards from there, certainly.
It's just so wild, right? Look, as far as almost into main Iran. Like,
it's crazy, isn't it? I know. So this is Lucan's Pharsalia, and this is a nod. So you know the Peloria festival that we spoke about earlier, where this mountain kind of burst open and it let this river come out and it drained the sea that was there to reveal this fertile land. Well, this has to do with Achilles, because as you can see on the second quote, the commentary on the Aeneid, look, it says Laricius Achilles. He's named for his vicinity because he was from Phthia. Both are cities in Thessaly. Larissa was named after the nymph Larissa, from whom Neptune created Pelagus, Phythion. Sorry, Pelagus. God, I'm losing my mind here tonight. From whom Neptune created Pelagus and Phythion. So I just wanted to point that out first, because Achilles being referred to as Laricius, Zeus. And then if we go back to the top one, I know I've done it in a bit of a dumb order there. This is from Lucan's Pharsalia. It says, between these mountains, hemmed in ancient time, the fields were marsh, for Tempe's pass was not yet cleft to give an exit to the streams that filled the plain. But when Alcides had smote Ossa from Olympus at the blow, and Nereus wandered at the sudden flood of waters to the main, then on the shore would it have slept for ever neath the deep. Sea-born Achilles' home Pharsalus rose, and Phulace whence sailed that ship of old, whose keel first touched upon the beach of Troy.
Oh, wow.
So, pretty interesting, that, I think.
That Lucan decided to keep that image, to really empower that image, right? And Pharsalia, this is an intense poem. There's some wildness in there.
Oh, yeah, wow. I'm doing some research on Achilles at the moment, and his connections to Scythians and Pelasgians, because some scholars have written about how he seems to be depicted on pottery wearing Scythian clothes. He was venerated as a deity around the Black Sea region, and there's even literary sources which call him a lord or ruler of Scythia, a Medon, which is from the same med root as Medea or Medusa, in the masculine nominative singular participle. So he's like the ruler of Scythia.
Did you ever see, I can't remember now, there's this one source that talks about how Medea and Achilles will wind up together eventually in the fields of Elysium.
Yeah.
And that they seem to be these there's this explicit magical pole between them, where like one is the feminine power, one's the masculine power, but they're like mirrors of each other.
Yep, and and who spent time being disguised as a girl, living with girls as
Right.
well, who's followed a certain path as well.
Also, a lot of it gets obscured, but so much of the story of Medea is her self-empowerment in becoming the emperor, engaging a masculine power, right? She has to free herself from the curse of Jason, right, by calling down the dragons, burning the city up. But she has to crawl across the freaking world, make it to Iran, and challenge the Medes to become the empress. So it's almost like she goes through this polar kind of masculinization in the same way that Achilles goes through this polar feminization. It's wild magic for sure.
It is, isn't it? It's amazing how much is actually, when you dive into the text, is in there that doesn't really, well, it gets overlooked to some extent, I feel.
There's also in that sacred image of Lady Babylon, right? You got to look at the duality of the form. You have the divine virgin riding upon the beast, right? And they uplift each other, the masculine and the feminine coming together to be that transcendent androgyne, working in harmony. It's Achilles and it's Medea at the same time.
Wow. And just for the simple fact as well that he was venerated, I think that says a lot, doesn't it?
It says so much, and so much of this stuff gets forgotten or obscured, or oh well, he's just another demigod. They had so many demigods, but some of the demigods are important, man. Dionysus, Heracles, right? Like, come on.
Yeah, that ancestor veneration, seems to have got quite the power behind it, really.
Absolutely. Like I said, right, when we're going into the earliest roots, what they're saying, our first roots, the first city, the first thing that we're building is a temple with a flame to the Virgin and the ancestors. Literally, the first thing that you do, like, does it? This is what Pelasgian religion is. You got a flame, you got a virgin, and you have the skulls of your ancestors, and then you have your sacred books. You have your sacred books. You're right.
And that just seemed to be quite a Proto-Indo-European theme as well, because when you looking at the Celts in Iberia, so they lived in these big, they were like nuclei, circular buildings which seemed to evolve around the hearth, and then they had a larger external wall around it. But then in the center, they often had a hill, which was the Acropolis, and as you entered the Acropolis, you would have skulls mounted on either side of your ancestors before you go into the Acropolis as well. So
this is the thing.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Where you eat, I just wanted to, where you eat, where you honor your dead, and where you make your democracy, and where you worship the goddess, all the same place. Beautiful.
That's it. And it's, when you think about it, you're like, the thought that has to go behind that. They're already doing this at this time, and it's been done for a long time at this stage. And then when you think about the planning and the procedure that goes behind all that, you think, wow, how many years has it taken to develop to this stage where they're just going to a new place and doing it?
Right. And I keep thinking about too, like, if we go back into like the anthropology, if we're looking at like, early hominids, we can see within these cave systems, they got these Venus figures, they worship in skulls, and they're building fire pits. This religion is so old, it may even predate modern humans. It may be in previous iterations of us,
Yeah, like those Venus statues that go way, way, way back.
And the worship of skulls and the flame go way back. Like, ancestor worship is the first religion, fire worship. This is the primordial stuff here.
That's why you've obviously got the head of Orpheus still giving oracles and things, and Odin's carrying around Mimea, who's giving him oracles. It's still in the mythology,
exactly. Isn't it? They can't get rid of it,
No, it's always going to be there. So we're onto a section now about the Etruscan connection. So the top quote there, that's just from the LSJ, which we saw earlier, which mentions Tessenoi Pelasgoi. So what we're doing is we're now looking at that source that it quoted in the LSJ, and it's from Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War. So it says, but the greater number are Tyrrheno-Pelasgians, once settled in Lemnos. So you can see how they're kind of double barrel it, because in the Greek, they're both masculine nominative plural there. So that's why It's like a hybrid appellation. And then underneath, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and Sophocles makes the chorus in his drama Inachus speak the following anapaestic verses: O fair flowing Inachus of ocean begot, that sire of all waters, thou rulest with might o'er the Argive fields and Hera's hills, and Tyrrhene Pelasgians also. Because you seem to have two different accounts of how the Pelasgians got there. One of them, it's a migration from Asia Minor, Lydia, I believe, if off the top of my head, from under somebody called Attis. So they drew a short straw because the land couldn't support them, and they migrated over to Italy and became Etruscans. There's also, obviously, the story we spoke about earlier about the Oinotrians and the Arcadians as well. So there's a few varying accounts. But here's another from Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and Dionysius's accounts can sometimes contradict themselves as well, so you've got to compare him with other authors. So Hellenicus of Lesbos says that the Tyrrhenians, who were previously called Pelasgians, received their present name after they had settled in Italy. These are the words in the Phoronis. Phrastor was the son of Pelasgus, their king, and Menippe, the daughter of Peneus. His son was Amuntor. Amuntor's son was Teutomedes, and the latter's son was Nanas. In his reign, the Pelasgians were driven out of their country by the Greeks, and after leaving their ships on the river Spines in the Ionian Sea, they took Croton, an inland city, and proceeding from there, they colonized the country now called Tyrrhenia.
That's so wild. Yeah. Someone's commenting, Dionysus can't be pinned down. You got to remember that a lot of these early historians, their idea of history was they would show up at a city, ask a bunch of locals, so what happens? And then they would write it down, unattributed it. And they would take like dozens of accounts and just not even tell you when they were switching between accounts. You know?
Yeah, you've definitely got to take him with a grain of salt and have a look at what other people are saying as well.
But it's still fun and it's still interesting.
Oh yeah,
There's
absolutely.
still a lot to be gained. But yeah, you know, the reason he's contradicting himself is because it's not a single narrative. He's going to people and he's gaining their truth, you know. But yeah, let's see here.
So this is from Herodotus here. He says so this is the other account about Attis and the son of Manes here as well.
Son of Manes. Okay, so we got to point out before we go. Okay, Attis. Who is Attis? In the Phrygian religion, right? Attis is like Dionysus, right? He is the one who goes through the maddening rites. He takes the theriac, castrates himself in divine imitation of the mother, and ascends to this place of through divine imitation to be like Cybele, right? So Attis is the one who worships Cybele. This is such an empowered thing for the Roman too, because it makes me think of Emperor Julian, hymn to the mother of gods, which tells of the story of Attis, who goes through that process of becoming Cybele, you know? So we got to point that out. And then the Manes, right? These are the spirits of the ancestors. This is related to Hecate, to Acca Larentia, to Persephone, right? To Hestia. Wild stuff.
That's it. And when you see statues of Attis as well, he's got the seven rays also.
Seven rays in his hair, you know. And you know, Dionysus is very much related to this because, you know, Rhea is very much the Greek Cybele. Sometimes she's called Rhea Cybele, and Dionysus is forever an adoration of Cybele, striving, even if he doesn't go through the rite of transformation, right? He's maddening the Maenads and going into the orgies, and he's experiencing the ecstasy through ripping himself apart, right? Through being destroyed, dying, and being reborn. But yeah, all deeply interconnected mythopoetic images here.
Yeah, it's absolutely full of it, isn't it? Really, it
really is. So I had to point out that while we're dealing with now that's something that's trying to take a myth and explain the historical origins, like there's all this euhemerus stuff going on, but I wanted you to also know who the deities were. Yeah.
No, thank you very much, because they're the blanks that I need to fill in. I read the sources like this, but with the esoteric background, I'm a little bit lagging, so I'm very, very grateful, Snappy.
Awesome.
So Herodotus here, he says, in the reign of Attis, son of Manes, there was a great scarcity of food in all Lydia. For a while the Lydians bore this with the patience they could. Presently, when the famine did not abate, they looked for remedies, but the famine did not cease to trouble them, and instead afflicted them even more. At last their king divided the people into 2 groups and made them draw lots, so that the one group should remain and the other leave the country. He himself was to be the head of those who drew the lot to remain there, and his son. That's very, very noble, isn't it? I'm kidding.
Right?
Yeah. It's like, sorry, son, you're the one that's going.
Right.
Yeah. He drew the lot to remain there, and his son, whose name was Tyrannus, of those who departed. Then the one group, having drawn the lot, left the country and came down to Smyrna and built ships, in which they loaded all their goods that could be transported aboard ship, and sailed away to seek a livelihood in a country. And at last, after sojourning with one people after another, they came to the Ombrici, where they founded cities that had lived and have lived there ever since. They no longer called themselves Lydians, but Tyrrhenians, after the name of the king's son who had led them there. And Smyrna as well, I believe, is close to where the Pelasgians were also described as settling in Asia Minor as well.
Oh, wow.
So they have that connection.
Wow.
And then this as well is saying that they actually met the Pelasgians before moving. So this is from Strabo. Anticyclides says that they, the Pelasgians, first colonized around Lemnos and Imbros, and that some of their number passed into Italy with Tyrannus, the son of Attis. So he could have potentially been a contingent of 2 people, according to this source here. And then, we're good. Oh, I'll just read the bottom one, actually. Okay. The bottom one's pretty important. So it says the Tyrrheni have now received from the Romans the surname of Etrusci and Tusci. The Greeks thus named them from Tyrannus, the son of Attis, after they say sent hither a colony from Lydia, and that's from Strabo. But that's specifically saying the Romans then started calling them Etruscans and Tuscans.
That you just set me up for such a layup. It's going to be great.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So this section's really long. It's about the Pelasgian creation myth. So I don't, because I'm obviously conscious of time and I want to get onto your section. But essentially, the Pelasgian creation, they're all taken from Pherecudes of Souros. Some sources say he was he had something to do with Pythagoras. He studied with Pythagoras, and the main sources say that there's like these 3 divine principles: Zas, life; Chthoniae, earth; and Chronos, time. And then in one of the sources it says time mates with itself to generate the elements. And I believe this is kind of like the idea you get in the emanation by pairs idea of people like Simon Magus, but then they talk about the one entity that kind of reproduces with itself without a pair. And that's kind of what they talk about here with Chronos. But if we just go forward, if we just skip through, because I just want to get through it. So if we go on to the next one, I'm looking for one in particular. So we'll read these out because they're actually really, really short. So this is one of the sources. On the one hand, Pherecudes the Syrian says the first 3 principles, including both time and earth, are always living. And this is where it sounds a bit Pythagorean. I say the one monad before the 2, and the 2 after the 1. But on the other hand, time makes from its own offspring, so it kind of generates off itself, fire and both spirit and water. I think the threefold nature of the intelligible, from which, having been divided in 5 depths, a great race of gods is established, the one called 5 soul, but equally in like manner, it is identical to say 5 form.
Anytime you're dealing with the 5, especially with the Greek, you got to remember it's Venus, isopsophy of the Venus symbol, the star. If you map Venus in the stars, it literally makes the 5-pointed star. And that image of the 5 is so powerful. It's a magical image. It calls you to transcend the limitation of the 4 elements, to reach up into the aether and to invoke that star power to draw it down. This is directly related to the priestesses of the moon. right? The devil kind of magic, full moon rites, Hecate, all this wildness, you know?
Beautiful.
And time and earth, right? You're dealing again, time and earth. This is Saturn and the Demeter. You know, you're dealing with most primal type stuff. It makes me thinking back into the Orphic cosmogony. You can get Chronos and Ananke, time and necessity, right? Necessity is nature. It's that manifestation of creation. It is the feminine snake, and Chronos is that masculine pillar of fire, the unchanging, unmoving, right? And together these things interact with each other, and they manifest the unfolding of creation, time and earth. Right?
It's amazing. It's so advanced for its time because it's just describing essentially how nature works in a metaphorical and poetic way, and you just think we don't even know that stuff now.
There are no ideas, right? Like this stuff is like, look at this, 458 AD. Like that's when they're talking about it, but this is far even older. What's this one? It's 38.
So Ferracudes, so he was pretty early. I think it was like, was it 500s? 500s potentially, BC.
Wow.
I'm just going to have a quick look because I don't want to give the correct information. So I'm just having a quick look. 6th century BCE.
That's beautiful.
So it's pretty old, yeah. So there's just another short one after this, very quickly. So, but the Book of the Syrian, so this is referring to Ferracudes. He's not, I think it's Souros. I think it's an island, not Syria, but it's obviously like a misinterpretation, I think. So, but the Book of the Syrian, which he wrote, is preserved, the beginning of which says Zas, Kronos, and Chthoniae always were. But Chthoniae, her name became Ge, since Zas gave to her the earth, which is a gift of honor, Geras. So they're just trying to explain the etymology, I believe, there. Then,
but look at it: Kronos and Chthoniae, Saturn and Persephone, right? Two sides of the same coin. Dionysus and Persephone, right? Two mirrors of each other. Medea and Achilles, two mirrors of each other. Love it.
That's it. So wild. And we're going to see the one shortly where it's actually ocean and earth, and we'll look at the etymology. So this is another little excerpt from Clement of Alexandria. Ferracudes the Syrian says, Zas made a big and beautiful mantle and fashioned into it the earth and ocean and the halls of ocean. But in Hesychius, because the word here is orgain in the text. So see how it's organon? So it's a different form. So it'll be orgain.
That's so mind-blowing. Earth is literally in the ocean. It's literally the symbol. Oh, gosh.
That's it. Yeah. And, you know, Hesychius tells us it's just another word for Okeanos. And even when you go on Organos on Perseus Tufts, it tells you, look, it means Oceanos. And then it even quotes Organos by Ferracudes there, and orgain as the main form.
But this is, guys, why is the Greek magical? This is why the Greek is magical, because it preserves this elemental understanding. It's not carried by the weight of dead metaphor and culture and bullshit advertising. You can get to these people who are still perceiving the earth with that pure imagination. And look, earth and the water and contained in one word. That's such an empowered magical image. You can get to the heights of the ideal through this. That's profound. Love it.
Yeah, and then later, I think it's there's one of the texts which actually says that it was originally earth and ocean were together, one and the same, which is why then when I saw that, I thought, well, that's quite interesting that he's using an older version of the word, which seems to have this, you know, contained within it. But here's Eusebius here now saying, Ferracudes, also taking the foundations from the Phoenicians, theologized about the god Orpheon, who he calls fire, and about the Orpheonidae, of whom we shall speak on another time.
Oh, wow. Orpheon. Getting back to the sacred flame stuff again, right? In that's the hearth, Hestia again.
But there's hints of this. So Zas obviously seems to get supplanted by Zeus. However, I was looking into the Mycenaean, and this is the symbol for Za. So Mycenaeans their symbols, it represents a consonant with a vowel added to it. So you'll have de, di, do, for example, and then you have a symbol for di, do, or you'd have a different consonant like ba, be, bi, da, de, di, etc. And this is the symbol for za. And it says here that sometimes the following syllable, such as L, M, N, R, and S, are also not written out. So I'm wondering if this is actually just would be a symbol for Zas if you were attempting to write it out.
It almost seems like it. And look, it is the Ankh. Do you notice that symbol is the Ankh? Right?
Yeah,
that's the Egyptian symbol of Osiris, right? The dying and rising god.
Like, yeah, it's when I saw that, I thought that's pretty crazy, to be fair.
And it's a 5-pointed figure as well. Well, it's rounded, but you get the 4 points, and it's a human figure. Wow, so interesting.
So that's a pure speculation. That though, I just threw that in, but
that's just fine. It's interesting.
Yeah, it was just happened when I saw it. I thought, well, actually, the last consonant, if it's an S, doesn't get written out. So if you were writing Zas in Mycenaean, that's
Zeus
what it
is
would.
Just the Ankh.
Because this is what happens. The story seems to change a little bit, but the Orphic Argonautica seems to preserve elements of this older teaching. So I just want you to bear in your mind these sources from Ferracudius, and it's going to talk about Orpheon here as well, because these are the sources which seem to preserve Orpheon and Eurynomy, because they don't get mentioned a great deal later on. So Orpheus lifted his lyre in his left hand and made essay to sing. He sang how the earth, heaven, and the sea once mingled together in one form. So my bad, it's the heaven, the earth, and the sea. After deadly strife, that's it. And after deadly strife was separated each from the other, and how the stars and the moon and the paths of the sun ever kept their fixed pace in the sky, and how the mountains rose, and how the resounding rivers with their nymphs came into being, and all creeping things. And he sang how first of all Orpheon and Eurynomy, daughter of Ocean, held the sway of snowy Olympus. So see how these are kind of like the first dual rulers, Orpheon and Eurynomy.
Absolutely.
And how
twin motif again.
That's it, the repair. And how through strength of arm one yielded his prerogative to Kronos and the other to Rhea, and how they fell into the waves of Ocean. But the other two meanwhile ruled over the blessed Titan gods, while Zeus, still a child, and with the thoughts of a child, dwelt in the Dictaean cave, and the earth-born Cyclopes had not yet armed him with the bolt, with thunder and lightning, for those things gave renown to Zeus.
So he's still hiding out in the cave with the Corybantes, making all their noise with his goat.
That's it.
That's a wild image, though, because we're seeing even before Kronos and Rhea, right? Like there's still levels and levels of different descendants that have been forgotten to time.
That's it, and it seems to be this Ferracudius who first, mentions Orpheon, or at least as far as I'm aware.
It's so wild that Saturn and Rhea supplant Orpheon. I love it.
And this is from Nonus.
Oh, so now we're going to get wild.
This is just another mention of Orpheon and Eurynomy. So, not in vain, the following, not in vain, will he sacrifice so much to Zeus, the king of Orpheon's thrones. For before these, Orpheon and Eurynomy, the daughter of Oceanus, ruled over the gods. And notice how she's the daughter of Oceanus as well. Others say it refers to the ancient ones, whom they call the avenging Titans. I will stain with blood, I will dye, I will redden. Not in vain will you stain the sandal and the base of the altar with the blood of the sacrifices. Clearly of bulls and bovine victims, giving the first most fruits. To Zeus, the lord and king of Orpheon's thrones. For before Kronos and Rhea, Orpheon and Eurynomy, the daughter of Oceanus, ruled over the gods, whom they call Titans. But Kronos overthrew Orpheon and Rhea overthrew Eurynomy, casting them into Tartarus, and they ruled over the gods, whom Zeus again cast into Tartarus, and took the power which previously Kronos and Rhea held. And before them Orpheon and Eurynomy, Hence he calls Zeus the Lord of the Kingdoms of Orpheon and Eurynomy.
This is so interesting because this really reminds me of the Hesiodic cycle, right? Because except that in Hesiod, he supplants Uranos, right? He divides the sky, the heavens, and the earth. He creates the three universes, Chronos. He cuts them apart, and he castrates Uranos, and she descends from the sky, becomes Aphrodite, the foam, and creation unfolds that way. But it's still this, we're supplanting of the old, bringing in the new, but now we're seeing it's Orpheon and Eurynomy are being supplanted by Kronos and Rhea. And we're not talking about Uranos.
It's this older myth just seeping through, being preserved.
Cycles within cycles within cycles. The cycles are longer than we thought. Maybe it wasn't Kronos who first slayed Uranos.
That's it.
Right? Interesting. Or, we could have many different people named Kronos, right? Because, you get, I know like some scholars, Ammon refutes this, but some scholars will insist that there's the agricultural Kronos, right? That is the Chronalia god, the one that is of the changing of the seasons that reaps the grain. And then there is the Orphic Kronos as time. If you go to Macrobius, he conflates them. So I think that's pretty safe to conflate them, but some scholars don't. So it's interesting. So we could be seeing, a manifestation of Kronos in the earth, and then there's also the divine Kronos,
Yeah, I'm open to that. Definitely. It's I did notice, there seems to be a bit of a conflation between the two terms, certainly, and in the literature. So it is something that stumped me a little bit and had me thinking. So I'll have to go back and think about that a bit more and do a bit more study.
Well, it gets so weird because there is so much euhemerism going on where, like, are these characters deities or are they real people? And does it really matter? Because you can conceptualize them in the ideal and then there are literal at the same time. And it's like, we could be having something like that here. It's interesting.
My brain always swings back and forth.
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, there you go. Oh, so that's your presentation.
There we go. There we go.
So thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thanks for giving me the time to go through that lengthy presentation. It's probably held you up a little bit, Snappy, so I do apologize.
I won't be too long. I don't want to keep you all night. Are you still good for me to show you a few things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Did you want to end your presentation with anything? What do you want to leave your audience with? What is the essence that you want to get across?
I did just want to very quickly, when I was doing the research on Orpheon and Eurynomy, I came across a text which said that hints of this older myth do seem to be in Homer, and I did find a couple of quotes which actually seem to mention Oceanus being and that lineage being like the origin of the gods, essentially. Just a couple of little abstract quotes.
Like we said, right? There are the authorities, and then there's Homer, the authority. So that's amazing.
That's it.
Yeah. We'll have to go take a look at that. So you covered most of the stuff I wanted to get to. Oh, let me see here. What is this? It's the wrong one. Okay, at the stage. There we go. So you covered a lot of that stuff. I'm just going to jump to what I really wanted to get into with you here is, where is it? Acca Larentia. So you had talked about the Etruscans, and we went through all of the various sources and how the Etruscans are related to the Pelasgians and how this name is a later name, but they are Etruscan, right? And so when I was looking into the foundation of Rome a while back, because I was really interested in this idea and exploring the various iterations, we have that common story about the wolf giving birth to the twins and suckling the twins, and then this mysterious woman, this prostitute, coming and finding them and raising them with her son. But there's so much to this myth, and there's so much to this founding that connects us to the Pelasgians. And I want us to go into it and see some of the more esoteric and wild connections. So this is coming from the Greek and Roman dictionary, the one from Perseus Tufts. And so this is the point they have on Acca Larentia. It says, Acca Larentia, or Larentia, a mythical woman who occurs in the stories in early Roman history. Macrobius, with whom Plutarch agrees in the main points, relates the following tradition about her. In the reign of Ancus Martius, a servant of the temple of Heracles invited during the holidays the god to a game of dice, promising that if he should lose the game, he would treat the god with a repast and a beautiful woman. When the god had conquered the servant, the latter shut up Acca Larentia, then the most beautiful and most notorious woman, together with a well-storied table in the temple of Heracles, who, when she left the sanctuary, advised her to try to gain the affection of the first wealthy man she should meet. She succeeded in making Caricius, an Etruscan, or as Plutarch calls him, Tiresias, love and marry her. After his death, she inherited a large property, which when she herself died, she left to the Roman people. Ancus, in gratitude for this, allowed her to be buried in the Velabrum and instituted an annual festival, the Laurentalia, at which sacrifices were offered to the Lares. There was also another festival to her called the Floralia. And we know this for sure because, again, Plutarch talks about this. They said it was about Chloris, the nymph of spring, but this is just a hidden way to talk about Persephone. And again, all the prostitutes come out during these festivals. And this Acca Larentia, we're just connecting to the same imagery of Persephone again. It's this, here her name literally means the mother of Lares, all right? Or the Larentia, it also has to do with the roads. The Lauras are the literal roads in Greek, you know? So we're dealing with this Hecatic magic here. So let's keep reading the story. Acca Larentia was the wife of the shepherd Faustulus and the nurse of Romulus and Remus, after they had been taken from the she-wolf Lupa. And we know Lupa is just a slang term for prostitute. So were they really taken from a she-wolf? Or is Acca Larentia just, she got abused? Anyway, Plutarch indeed states that this Larentia was altogether a different being from the one occurring in the reign of Ancus, but other writers such as Macer relates their stories as belonging to the same being. According to Mesurius, Sabinus, and Gellius, she was the mother of 12 sons. Right now we're dealing with zodiacal imagery. And when one of them died, Romulus, one of them dies, again, these dying and rising twins, one of them dies and one of them comes in to step into place and is adopted in conjunction with the remaining 11. The names of the fraters Arvales. Those of you who are fans of Roman history, you'll recognize the fraters Arvales as becoming the personal priests of Augustus later on, and they almost become exclusively to the Augustan line. And they're super, super secretive, so we don't even know what the Arvales are doing half the time, but it's related to this magical rites of Acca Larentia and the foundation of Rome. So, according to the other accounts, again, she was not the wife of Faustulus, but a prostitute who from her mode of life was called Lupa by the shepherds, and who left the property she gained in that way to the Roman people. But again, we're dealing with all this magical imagery, and what's so wild too is around Rome, there's also a really famous grove to Faunus and to this oracular, this oracle, this what do you call them? One of the Sibyls. Her name is Albania, and people have to go into this thing where she reads from magical book literature, and you sleep, and then Pan or Faunus comes and visits you in your dreams. So there's all this wild imagery connected with this stuff.
Wow, honestly, that's really fascinating. And I think the link to the wolf as well, because, when I was talking about Evander earlier, right, I was saying that connection to the wolf deities there as well. And you're like, so where does this wolf kind of version of the cult, come from? And is this it manifesting here in the on the Roman side here later on, or the Etruscan side?
Right. And I also, we always have to remember when we're talking about the wolves and the dogs, this immediately connects us to the cult of Hecate and Artemis. The priestesses of Artemis are often called dogs. The wolves are related to Hecate. Dogs are related to Hecate. So there's this really interesting imagery here, right? Acca Larentia, the one who's at the crossroads, who's the mother of spirits. This is Hecate again, right? Whatever may be thought of the contradictory statements respecting Acca Larentia, Thus much seems clear that she was of Etruscan origin and connected with the worship of the Lares, right? The spirits of place and of the dead, from which her name Larentia itself seems to be derived. This appears further from the number of her sons, which answers to that of the 12 country Lares, and from their circumstances that the day sacred to her was followed by one sacred to the Lares. So lots of wild stuff there. And then I wanted to go to Plutarch's Romulus here. Where was it? Yeah, there we are. Okay. So this is a quote from Plutarch's Romulus. And this is going to be talking about what Plutarch believed to be the most accurate version of the story of the founding of Rome. So we're no longer talking about Acca Larentia, but now we're talking about a parallel figure, Rhea Silvia. We got the great goddesses Rhea here, though. And Silvia, we're dealing with this river salvation, right? So we got the waters. We got this powerful goddess related to Saturn, deep Pelasgian stuff. Okay. But the story which has the widest credence and the greatest numbers of vouchers was first published among the Greeks in its principal details by Diodes of Paratheus and Fabius Pictor. Follows him in most points. Here again, there are variations in the story, but its general outline is as follows. The descendants of Aeneas reigned as kings in Alba, and the succession devolved at length upon two brothers, Numitor and Amulius. Amulius divided the whole inheritance into two parts, selling the treasures and the gold which had been brought from Troy over against the kingdom, and Numitor chose the kingdom. Amulius, then in possession of the treasure, made more powerful by it than Numitor, easily took the kingdom away from his brother, fearing lest that the brother's daughter should have any children, made her a priestess of Vesta, bound to live unwedded, a virgin all her days. Okay, so here we have this, all of this wild imagery, though, before I go on, because look, they're fighting over the kingdom. The kingdom is also the name of the goddess Larissa, Basileia, right? And then they're taking one of these people, they're taking the woman and they're turning into a Vestal version, the one who tends to the flame, the heart of the hearth, back to this primordial image, back to this goddess Phorenesis again, right? So much wildness here. Her name is variously given as Leah or Rhea or Silvia. Not long after this, she was discovered to be with child, contrary to the established laws for Vestals. She did not, however, suffer the capital punishment which was her due, because the king's daughter, Antho, interceded successfully in her behalf, but she was kept in solitary confinement, that she might not be delivered without the knowledge of Amulius. Delivered she was of two boys, and their size and beauty were more than human. Wherefore Amulius was all the more afraid, and ordered a servant to take the boys and cast them away. So now we're almost seeing we have a virgin birth, right?
Yeah.
Not in the literal sense, but the birth by a virgin mother, right? She's not supposed to give birth, and she has now been, abused, and she's giving birth to these magical twins. So much wild magical imagery here. The servant's name was Faustulus. Faunus, maybe, according to some, but others give the name to the man who took the boys up. Obeying the king's orders, the servant put the babes into a trough and went down towards the river, purposing to cast them in. But when he saw that the stream was much swollen and violent, he was afraid to go close up to it, and setting his burden down near the bank, went his way. Then the overflow of the swollen river took and bore up the trough, floating it gently along, and carried it down to a fairly smooth spot, which is now called Carmelas, but formerly Germanus, perhaps because brothers are called Germani. So doesn't this seem like other biblical images you see, taking a baby and putting them in the river and setting them downstream?
Yeah.
Like, what is going on?
I've seen that motif elsewhere as well. It's, it's like, as you said, it's quite reused motif.
Right? What I want people to recognize is that these images are far older than people think, that these are going back before the Bible, and these are unitary images that everyone is striving for, right? Look, and also Catholicism is a Roman religion. Remember this, right? And it is the universal church. And how is it establishing and imagining its myth? It's displacing and reinterpreting the Roman myths. You know, we have a virgin mother, we have babes being pushed down the river. Like,
yeah, it's all there.
It's all there. It's all there. So then next I wanted to go to, you brought up Ovid's Fausti. So I wanted to go to Ovid's Fausti because we're talking about the Manes, the Lares, these spirits, right? Well, when I was reading the Fausti, there's this goddess that shows up called Diamuta Tacita, and she is said to be the mother of Lares, right? So this connects us with Acca, Larentia, and Rhea Silvia. So who, according to Ovid, is this goddess, Tacita, the silent, the mute, who is also the mother of Lares? So let's read this. So this is from Ovid's Fausti. At once you will ask of me, who is the goddess Muta, the mute? Hear what I have learned from the old men gone in years, conquered by exceeding love of Juturna. Jupiter submitted to many things which so great a god ought not to bear. For now she would hide in the woods among the hazel thickets. Now she would leap down into her sister's waters. The god called together all the nymphs who dwell in Latium, and thus in the midst of the troop he spake aloud. Your sister is her own enemy and shuns that union with the supreme God, which is all for her good. Pray look to her interests and to mine, for what is a great pleasure to me will be a great boon to your sister. When she flees, stop her on the edge of the bank, lest she plunge into the water of the river. He spake. Assent was given by all the nymphs of the Tiber and by those who haunt Illa Divine, the whiting bowers. If chance there was a naiad nymph, Lara by name. And again, Lara, we're dealing with two interesting things with this. I think of the roads, and I think of the magic of the Babel, the Lala, and also the Lares. So the nymph Lara. But her old name was the first syllable repeated twice. La, right? So we're talking about really secret magic. This is getting us into the Sabazian cult stuff. If anyone wants to dive into this, I did a 4-part series on the dragon tongue. I don't want to get into it today, but barbarous words, Pelasgian magic, okay? All right? And that was given to her Mark, her fallen. Many a time Almo had said to her, my daughter, hold thy tongue. But hold it she did not. No sooner did she reach the pools of her sister Juturna than fly the banks, said she, and reported the words to Jupiter. So here she decides she's going to protect her sister from rape and tells her to fly, and then goes and faces Jupiter and said, yeah, I told her to run away. What are you going to do about it? Like, this lady's bad ass.
Yeah.
She even visited Juno, right, which is Hera, after expressing her pity for merry dames. Your husband, quoth she, is in love with the naiad Juturna. Jupiter fumed and wrenched from her the tongue she had used so indiscreetly. He also called for Mercury. Take her to the dead land, said he. That's the place for mutes. A nymph she is, but a nymph of the infernal marsh she'll be. The orders of Jupiter were obeyed. On their way they came to a grove. Then it was, they say, that she won the heart of her divine conductor. He would have used force. For want of words, she pleased with the look, and all in vain she strove to speak with her dung lips. She went with child and bore twins, who guard the crossroads and ever keep watch in our cities. They are the Lares. So she is taken to the deep swamp by Mercury, Hermes, and then he makes love to her, and they give birth to the spirits, the Lares, the Manes, right? So again, taking us back to this Acca Larentia character, to the Rhea Silvia character, and to this spirit kind of magic that's so foundational in all of the Pelasgian stuff. Just absolute wild. So, but where it gets even interesting, I didn't show this a word in Fausti, but in a previous passage to that point, Ovid actually uses a specific word for silence, a specific name, tacita, and he talks about these rites that this old woman does. Wow, this name tacita is very important because it means the silent, but it also is one of the names that Plutarch that Numa uses for his muse. So Numa is the second king of Rome after Romulus and is said to be the theological founder of the Roman religion, right? He is like their most, the one they look to for most of their founding rites and most of their magic. He's kind of like their most important figure. So here's what Numa has to say about Tacita. In the like manner of Numa's fiction was the love which a certain goddess or mountain nymph bore him, and her secret meetings with him, as already mentioned, and his familiar converse with the muses. For he ascribed the greater part of his oracular teachings to the muses, and he taught the Romans to pay especial honors to one muse in particular, whom he called Tacita, that is, the silent or the speechless one, thereby perhaps handing on and honoring the Pythagorean precept of silence. But I think this is far deeper. I think that this is the founder goddess of Rome, the one who gave birth to Romulus and Remus and is still there behind the scenes. And now she's talking to Numa, right? You know what I mean?
No, I like it. Yeah, I like it. And the thing that stands out for me is even though the name seems to change, she's still the nymph. And that is the story we find in Evander, where his mother was actually venerated as the nymph as well. So it's
the nymph. Exactly. It's this idea of these river spirits, right, that are then abducted, and and the connection to the spirits of the dead and the hearth and all this stuff. So I wanted to go to Pausanias and talk a little bit about Phronesius to connect us back now to the Pelasgian element. So let's see what our man Pausanias has to say about Phronesis. There is also another legend which says that Phronesis was the first inhabitant of this land, and that Inachus, the father of Phronesis or Phronius, was not a man but the river. This river was the rivers of Cephisus and Asterion. Notice that name?
Yep.
Judged concerning the land between Poseidon and Hera, right? Who gets to control what part? Hera gets the land, Poseidon gets the water, demarcating the divide, right? They decided that the land belonged to Hera, so Poseidon made their waters disappear. For this reason, neither Inachus nor either of the other rivers I have mentioned provides any water except after rain. And some of their streams are dry except those at Lerna. Phronius, the son of Inachus, was the first to gather together inhabitants, who up to that time had been scattered and living in isolated families. The place into which they were first gathered was named the city of Phronius. So this is what I was talking about, where he is the builder of the first city. He builds the first hearth, and he sets up the first temple to Hestia and Hera, right? The virgin tending to the flame, and the flame being that divine virgin herself in the heights of the ideal, And so this was the quote I really wanted to show you, that when I saw this, it was just a one line out of context, but it absolutely blew my mind, right? They're talking about the original temple made by Phronius that united in the first city. It's a cave. Who's in the cave? Isis, who once had the manger in the caves of Phronesis, queen of Pharos, now goddess of the breastless east.
Yeah.
Right? Why is this so wild? Because when we're talking about Isis, I couldn't quote this because I don't know the Greek, but I know you and the advanced Greek students are reading Lucian's version of the Golden Ass. But he comes out and tells us who Isis is directly. And we also have this version in Apuleius's Golden Ass. It's not as explicit, but there's a direct connection here. Look at this. There at Pessinus, the Phrygians, firstborn of men, call me Cybele, mother of the gods and Attica. A people sprung from their own soil, made me Crapopian Minerva, and sea-girt Cyprus. I am Paphian Venus, Dictina Diana to the Cretan archers, Stygian Proserpine. There we go. Persephone to the three-tongued Sicilians, at Eleusis, ancient Ceres, Demeter, Juno to some, to others Bellona, Hecate, Rhamnusia, while the races of both Ethiopians first be lit at dawn by the risen sun's divine rays, and the Egyptians too, deep in arcane lore, worship me with my own rites, and call me by my true name, Royal Isis.
That's great. That's a great quote. That.
Royal flippin' Isis. But look at this. Look at what I want people to see is all of the rhymes, right? These stories are not all the same, but look at the story of Medea. Look at the story of Persephone. Look at the story of Tacita, Diamuta, right? All of these stories are so similar, going to the underworld, becoming empowered, and then returning, giving birth to the spirits, tending to these flames, all of this stuff. There's so much overlap. There's so much interconnection here. You know, it's very clear, you know, the Greeks, at least the more mystical ones, are connecting this power of Isis to this Basileia, to Larissa. And this is the power that they're installing in all of their cities. And this is the uniting force that is that hearth magic that manifests their democracy, that brings everyone together. You know, that's the true Pelasgian root. It's Isis.
Wow, that's pretty pretty crazy.
So that's where I wanted to go with my more esoteric part of it.
No, that was fantastic, and I think you pulled a lot of themes together for me to give me a path to go down. So I really appreciate it, and I think sometimes just seeing it from a different angle as well can just completely open up another door, because obviously I'm more engrossed in the literary sources and the language, but the esoteric side and looking at other religions and their practices I really lack on. So, you know, that's been absolutely fantastic for me to kind of to see that as well and see you pull those sources together. So thank you.
I know, and I appreciate you I appreciate all the work you do, because you have such an incredible way, like I said, trying to piece together this Pelasgian story. Man, it is not easy, and you managed to form it in a really concise and an empowered way. And, you know, we came to very similar conclusions. You had all the pieces. I just had to show you, like, wow, look at this, though. If you look at all these epithets, who are they all talking about? Yeah. Right? What are we seeing? We're seeing the Eleusinian rites, the rites of Persephone, going all over the Mediterranean world. And it is that inspired Queen of the Dead who is the center of everything. Right?
Yeah, and then I'm not even surprised either.
No, of course
I was, but I was like, whoa, and then I'm like, oh yeah.
Of course it is. Of course it is, but it's like you're still surprised, like you kind of know it, but you're also surprised when you see it, you know?
Yeah. Seeing it written down, just plain as day like that. It's
right. Yeah. Who does the first man put in his cave? Isis.
Yep.
It also,
of course he does, in a cave.
Right? Like when we're talking about the Temple of the Birds, right? If you're going to establish this, you're going to build a city, you're going to build a temple, you're going to manifest the self, you need the muse. That's all it comes down to. You got to install the Virgin and light the flame. That's the essence of this Pelasgian magic on all of these transcendent levels, whether it's the personal crossroads, whether it's the literal crossroads, whether it's in the home, whether it's the Prytaneum, the city, or the globe.
And that's what founding the colonies are all about, isn't it? It's going out there and founding that origin that is the seed that germinates.
Yeah, so beautiful. Well, this was so much fun. I absolutely loved
it's been
it.
amazing.
We'll have to get together and figure out another topic that we can both kind of bring our perspectives and mash heads on. Is there anything coming up for you that you would like to promote, or anything that you've produced recently that our audience needs to know about? I know you did that Beltane tour that was so incredibly wild. Please promote yourself, talk about your channel and what you've been up to.
Oh, thank you very much. So I've dived back into a little bit of Celtic history for a period. I just recently released a video about the centaurs, which I mentioned earlier. So if you want to check out all those sources, they're in that video. I then did the Beltane video, which was essentially, I did a history of the historical accounts, the history and mythology of Beltane, and it's filmed at the Beltane Fire Festival from this year. And I'm working on right now a video on Belinos, the Celtic god that is often syncretized with Apollo. And I've found somebody from the historical record as well who has the name Belinos. And so I'm pretty, and Yeah, and this guy's pretty crazy as well. So I'm excited to get it. I'm not saying it's the same person, but just the fact this person's using this name is just super interesting to me, and I've not seen anybody actually mention it before with reference to Belenos. So that's what I'm working on next, and I'm also working on the Achilles Scythian connection video as well, looking at all those sources which talk about his veneration in the Black Sea and that call him the ruler or ruler of Scythia.
Before we end this, one question we didn't get to that I wanted to ask you, since your main original research focus was the more Celtic, Gaelic sort of expanded world, do you see any of this Pelasgian stuff coming up that way? Now, I know there's all that weird stuff with the Princess Scotia in Scotland. What are your thoughts on all of this? Is there a Pelasgian route to the Gaelic and Celtic world?
Well, the only kind of tentative link that I've seen, which links specifically the Pelasgians to the Celtic side, is there was a source. I did have it on the slide, but I think because it wasn't relevant, we just glossed over it. But it's when they talk about the Pelasgians establishing the Samothracian mysteries, there was a source, it could be Strabo, who talks about an island which is close to Britain, where they practice a similar rite to the Samothracian mysteries. And so that was the only specific link where Strabo is saying, look, they're performing a similar rite to the Samothracian mysteries, which apparently related to the Pelasgians. But on a genetic level, it looks like the Mycenaeans and the Minoans, they looked genetically identical, with the exception of the Mycenaeans had the Yamnaya genetic input, and this genetic input seemed to come directly from Yamnaya associated groups, whereas the Celts get the Yamnaya ancestry through the intermediary of the Bell-Beaker
there is that
population.
weird thing though, but because both the Minoans and the famously the Irish and the Scots have red hair, and this is it's a suppressive gene. And it seems to be also a magical gene within this Pelasgian current. They really talk about the power of this kind of red golden hair and that really pale skin as being an element of these goddesses, or at least of the oracular goddesses.
Yeah, and just further to that point as well, I think it's Deucalion's wife, I think, is called Puros, which obviously comes from the word pur, fire, and when you look at it, it says it was used to describe the Scythian genos, the Scythian race, and Achilles' son is also called Puros. No, sorry, the female version's Pura, and it's Puros in the male, in the masculine.
It's so wild, right? The fiery red hair. So interesting. So but still, we're going so far back, it's speculation, but we can see the connections.
Yeah, and I think I would be happy to certainly make a Scythian connection, because Robert the Bruce himself uses that as a declaration of independence addressed to the Pope. And
he's so badass.
Oh yeah, God. I know. He's like, we came from Scythia, and obviously when you look at the genetics, the Bell-Beaker element seems to have the R1A genetics, which are also associated with Yamnaya. So I do believe there is a connection at the very least. So,
and then did you notice any connection between the Pelasgian and the Germanic or the Nordic? Because again, we have that the Danube is right there, so it would make sense. But we hear you did reference a couple stories of people going north, but was there anything more there?
Well, there's been some recent articles published actually about the trade connections that were going on in the Bronze Age, especially with the Naurage culture, who were on Sardinia. So they had the bull horns, and they found some. Ironically, everyone goes, the Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, but then weirdly enough, there are actually Bronze Age horned helmets. But they probably came from the Naurage culture in Sardinia now, because they look identical to the effigies that they made of themselves with these horned helmets. So was it possible? Yes, it was possible that people were trading and moving. The Orsir in the Norse mythology are put over in Troy They're originally in Troy to start with before migrating across. Thor is said to have married somebody called Cybele. She's actually called Sybil in the text. And Vulva which is their priestesses who sit on a high seat called a Seithjalar, which is kind of like a tripod, and she gives oracles from that as well. And then there
also
seems
to be a whole thing with the satyr too, about being, you're going through that divine androgyne kind of magic, right, where the men become more like women.
Yeah.
And then there's this taboo, and I've read some speculation that because in the Greek tradition there's this understanding that to be enthused by the god, right, Apollo, is to be penetrated by Apollo. And there's all this references to like the magic that would be used through suppositories, right, or magic that would be used with the alabastron. And so there's the speculation we're the satyr using these kind of penetrative medicines, and that's why, and it's originating in this other magical tradition, and that's why the Norse are so weirded out about it.
It's in the Norse text as well. Have you heard of the mead of poetry in the
right,
Norse
I have
text?
heard of that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's Zeus transforms into an eagle, drinks it and steals it, and then some of it comes out of his backside, and another person drinks it out of his backside and then becomes the best poet. And you're like, oh, right, okay, then yeah, I know where I've seen that motif before.
Right. And I have to wonder, there's probably something going on parallel in the Norse culture as well. Oh wow.
Yeah.
So we can speculate till the cows come home, but this was so much fun.
We could go 2 hours on the Norse stuff.
Right. This was so much fun. Thanks for entertaining all these wild speculative theories, and thank you guys all for joining us, and thank you for the new memberships, everyone. And please go subscribe to Old Boy's channel. He's got all kinds of new stuff coming out. The Achilles video sounds wild. And yeah, any final words before we say goodnight?
I just want to say thank you very much. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be asked to come on your channel. I really do appreciate it. And thanks everyone out there for watching as well. It's been great.
Lots of fun. Thank you, everyone. Peace and love, and take care.
Night.